Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Hogwarts. Voldemort, don't stop me from studying. Chapter 61. Wade raised his eyebrows and turned to look over, and saw that it was the silly Barnabas in the tapestry. Whenever he entered and left the room of requirement, he would see this tapestry first. Sometimes he saw the silly Barnabas forcing the trolls to put on ballet skirts and dance, and sometimes he saw the trolls hitting the silly Barnabas on the head with a big stick. The two were always entangled in this tapestry, never talking to each other, and never going anywhere else. Originally, he thought that this was because the tapestry was different from the portraits. At this time, the trolls in the tapestry were lying on the side and sleeping, and the wizard was sitting cross-legged on the ground. His eyes were obviously looking at him, and he said with a very serious expression, "Silly. Mr. Barnabas, it doesn't matter, call me silly Barnabas, they all call me that anyway." Barnabas said indifferently, and then asked, "I guess you took something from the room of requirement." "Yes," Wade admitted generously, "but this does not belong to the room of requirement, it was put in by someone else, just like the broom I took away before." "It doesn't matter whether it was put in and hidden by someone else, kid," Barnabas said slowly. "In this castle, all the things abandoned by their owners will eventually appear in this room, when they are forgotten by their owners, became part of the room of requirement. You can take what you need, such as the broom, but you should not take away what you don't need, or use the room of requirement to satisfy some personal desires." Quote, "Personal desires?" Wade asked back. "For example, what?" "For example, reselling the things inside to make money." Barnabas paused and added, "If you really need money, you can look for it in the junk pile, and you should be able to find some galleons, enough to meet your daily needs." "Then what if I really take away the things I don't need?" Wade asked again. Barnabas said seriously, "Then one day, the things you take away will return to Hogwarts in a way you never want to see. And you will violate the original intention of entering the room of requirement and eventually be punished by the magic contract." His tone was sad and compassionate, as if he had seen the scene of Wade's tragic death or torture in the future because he was unwilling to accept his advice. The troll next to him groaned in his sleep, scratched his butt, turned over and continued to sleep. Its stinky feet were right in front of Barnabas, so Barnabas had to pinch his nose and move to another place to sit, then adjusted his mood and continued to stare at Wade with heavy eyes. So, Wade couldn't help but smile and asked, "If I found a dangerous black magic item in the room of requirement and was worried that it would hurt other students, so I took it away to deal with it, would this also be considered a violation of the contract?" So. Barnabas' train of thought was interrupted. He thought seriously for a long time before stammering, "This should be considered a good deed. The castle will thank you. Of course it is not a violation of the contract. Anyway, thank you for your advice, Barnabas. I will return this thing after I deal with the black magic on it." Wade waved his hand and turned to leave. After walking a distance, Wade finally couldn't help but sighed softly. When he finally found the room of requirement under the guidance of the elves, Vader had thought that if he needed a room full of gold galleons or time converters, could the room of requirement also satisfy him? Or when he was studying in the room of requirement, he took away all the books or alchemical tools in it. When he came back next time, would he see an empty room, or would all the things he needed still appear? After thinking about it, Vader finally suppressed all kinds of thoughts and did not experiment whether there was such a bug in the room of requirement. He was not the first discoverer of the room of requirement. Before that, countless students and professors may have discovered the magical effect of this room. Voldemort also hid his Horcruxes here. The room of requirement was not a secret among the house elves in the castle. If the things in the room of requirement could really be taken away at will, then didn't any of his students before him discover this bug? It's not possible that everyone is as noble as Harry Potter in the original book, and never thought of using the room of requirement to make a profit, right? Apart from anything else, at least when he was young, Tom Riddle was definitely a person who could make the most of resources. He didn't empty the room of requirement. The only explanation could be that he couldn't, not that he didn't want to. It seems that Tom Riddle should have been warned by Barnabas at the beginning. With that person's character, he would not easily believe the words of a tapestry. After all, he was also a curse master and a descendant of Slytherin. Maybe he tried it in different ways and finally found that the tapestry was right. Room of requirement. provide help to those who really need it. Wade had long guessed that people had reached some kind of invisible contract when they stepped into this room, so he didn't try it randomly. But when the guess was really confirmed, he was still disappointed. Who would hate to get something for nothing? Wade patted his face and reminded himself that he had received a lot of help from the room of requirement. People are greedy and don't be driven by desire and forget what they really want. The next morning, the sky finally cleared up. After experiencing heavy snow and continuous rainy weather, the students showed great love for the sunny weather. Many people got up early and walked, chatted, chased and played in groups on the grass around the castle. At breakfast time, countless owls flew into the hall from outside and threw packages in front of the students. Despite the existence of the Friends book, owls, the couriers of the wizarding world, have not been eliminated and laid off. They still fly in the sky of Great Britain with large and small packages. Ava also landed beside Wade, bringing Fiona's newly made candies and desserts. She pecked Wade's arm a little angrily, as if blaming him for leaving her at home. Wade tore some beef for her, and Ava swallowed it. Only then was she satisfied, cooed twice, and spread her wings and flew away. Wade distributed some of the candies and desserts in the package to the students around him, and turned around and said, "Michael." Michael responded and praised, "Mrs. Gray's peanut candy is delicious. I'll put it in the umbrella room later. If you like it, take more." Wade said, "Take a few photos for me later." "Okay." Michael agreed naturally and asked, "Did you buy a camera?" "My father gave me a Christmas gift." Wade said, "Take 2 photos for me too. I haven't thought about taking photos since I got to school." "Okay." Just as the two were about to finish their breakfast quickly, 2 more owls flew towards Wade, one dropped a letter, and the other dropped a large package. Michael was surprised. "Did your family send you so many things?" "No." Wade looked at the signature on the envelope. "This is not from my parents." Added more for the first leisure survivor. A thin letter from Gringotts. The letter listed his recent income and the expenditure of a sum of gold galleons taken out by his father Ferdinand Gray from the vault. Wade glanced at the numbers on it and put the letter away casually. The package came from Marchione, with a letter attached, which wrote about the recent sales of the Friends book, the income that Wade should get, and the next promotion plan for the Friends book. Although the productivity is not up to par, Marchione has already spread the market to Asia and Africa. Marchione also drew several new versions of the Friends book that will be launched in the letter, and implemented Wade, as the inventor of the Friends book, to give valuable advice so that the launch of the new product can achieve greater success. Looking at Marchione's earnest words in the letter, it seems that this business tycoon is really worried about this and can't sleep at night, as if only Wade can guide his life. Wade. He understood why Professor Murray said, "Just use that guy's ability to help you make money. If he often harasses you, just ignore him." Professor Murray must have received this kind of owl from Marchione before. But for Wade, Marchione not only brought him a large sum of galleons, but also sent a package of alchemical materials. Although most of them were ordinary, there were also precious materials such as African tree snake skin that were difficult to buy even with money. Wade still wrote a letter in reply seriously. Of course, it was not a trivial matter such as which pattern was more attractive. What Wade wrote was some ideas about improving the Friend book that he had recently generated while studying alchemy. For example, it was limited to only 2 or 3 people in advance, which was often not convenient when used. He changed the magic loop, and then only a simple spell was needed to make multiple blank Friend books connected. For example, a picture can be added to the bottom page of the new Friend book, listing various emojis that can express emotions with simple symbols. Although it is useless, Wade knows that this kind of thing is very popular among young people. Some words that feel too cold when written in words will appear humorous and cute when replaced with emojis or emoticons, which may stimulate another wave of consumption desire. In addition, a special positioning function can be added to some Friend books, and the location of the other party can be checked at any time by holding the other party's Friend book. Wade thought for a while and added another paragraph to the letter. "I think this kind of Friend book should emphasize that it has a positioning function in the header, and the color and appearance should also be obviously different from ordinary Friend books. If the Friend book originally used for communication can also be positioned, it will be suspected of invading privacy, and ordinary people may find it difficult to accept." Its buyers should be between parents and children, or between lovers with sincere feelings. I just don't know if his friend book will accidentally break up a few couples in the future. Wade imagined the scene. In the past, lovers would ask each other, "Do you love me? How much do you love me? Swear." In the future, the way lovers express loyalty will probably become, "Can you exchange your position in the friend book with me?" The test came so unexpectedly. Wade thought about his own situation again. He didn't mind his parents knowing his position, and as for the lover who didn't even have a shadow. If he fell in love in the future, he would definitely aim to get married, and loyalty to marriage would be the minimum requirement. And Wade didn't plan to get married at such a young age. Was magic not magical enough? Or was alchemy not interesting enough? Falling in love. What love? It would only waste his precious time. So the arrow he shot out today would never come back to him. Wade wrote down with confidence and finished it quickly. He handed the letter to the owl to catch, attached the modified version of the friend book, and watched it fly away. The auditorium, the lobby, the umbrella house, the library, the Black Lake, the Forbidden Forest, the Quidditch pitch, the Ravenclaw lounge, the dormitory. Ved took photos of almost all the representative places he could step into in the school. When he met familiar classmates and professors on the road, they would take photos together. Although Vader has never been a parent, he has been a son for many years. When he went out to travel, he always liked to take pictures of various unique buildings and natural landscapes, hoping that his parents could share these beautiful scenery. Later, he realized that his parents were not interested in these scenery at all, they just wanted to see him in the scenery. Therefore, in his lens now, no matter how wonderful the environment is, the focus is always on people in front of the greenhouse. He stood next to the professor with a kind expression and a slight smile. By the Black Lake, he and the classmates with bright and lively smiles were holding shoulders. Inside the umbrella house, the SSC people sat together and talked and laughed. Fear often comes from the unknown, like walking in the endless darkness, but only hearing your own heartbeat. At this time, if there is a lamp in hand, illuminating the surrounding environment, so that the eyes can see the thorns and quagmires clearly, even if the road is still bumpy, the fear will naturally dissipate gradually. The film cameras that can be used in Hogwarts are of classic style, and the process of developing photos is originally cumbersome and long, but magic speeds up the process. Wade turned the room of requirement into a darkroom for developing photos, and then put the negatives into the developing solution. After a series of processes such as developing, stopping, washing, fixing, and printing, he finally got a stack of moving photos. He changed to a brightly lit environment and flipped through the photos one by one. The camera not only recorded their movements and scenes, but also seemed to record their mood when taking the photos. The smiles of the people in the photos seemed to be brighter than usual. Professor Sprout would touch his head from time to time, and Professor Flitwick would sometimes jump on the pile of books excitedly and sometimes jump down. Professor Murray was usually kind and gentle, and Wade regarded him as a source of wisdom and a mentor in life. Professor Murray in the photo was originally this image, but after taking a sip of tea, his whole face suddenly wrinkled, his eyes closed, his eyebrows shifted, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly, as if he was too bitter. Is that cup of tea so bitter? Could it be that American black coffee was put in it? Wade recalled carefully, but he didn't pay attention to the cup of tea at all at that time. At this time, looking at Professor Murray in the photo, he was grinning because of the bitterness, and then he took another sip out of curiosity, and then continued to grin. Wade couldn't help laughing. This photo must be kept privately, otherwise if Professor Murray sees it, he will definitely destroy it to ashes because it destroys his image, right? Wade continued to flip through the photos, and suddenly his hands stopped moving, and his eyes instantly became gentle. It was a photo of their family sitting on the sofa at Christmas. But at this time, the three people in the photo were very close, and his parents were leaning against him, holding hands. The two of them gazed at each other tenderly, kissing from time to time, or lowering their heads and kissing Wade's forehead in the photo. Leaning against the window, Wade stroked the photo with his fingers, and couldn't help but smile, with a warm light flashing in his eyes. After Harry finished his hard training, he went to the hall to eat and saw Ron and Hermione at the long table. Hermione was flipping through a book, while Ron was holding a piece of bread in deep thought. You know what? When Harry walked over, Ron suddenly said in a low voice, "I found a truth." "What is it?" Harry asked curiously, while filling his plate with food. "Oh," Ron turned his head and said with an extremely serious expression, "if you don't eat lunch, dinner will be more delicious." He bit the bread fiercely. "I found a truth when I was 3 years old." Harry imitated him and said, "Please tell me, Mr. Potter." Ron stretched out his hand and said vaguely but carefully, "If you are tired and hungry, any meal will become very delicious." Harry said, "Oh wow," and ate most of the sandwich in one bite. Hermione glanced at them, heavily marked the book twice, marking the notes. After Harry had almost filled his stomach, she frowned and said, "The game is about to start, why is the team training so intensive?" "Yes, because the game is about to start." When it comes to this topic, Harry feels his stomach twitching, and Snape is the referee. "Listen to me, brother, Snape must be holding a grudge against you for defeating Slytherin last time," Ron suggested. "Why don't you break your leg so you don't have to play?" Hermione snorted, and was too lazy to correct the two people's persecution complex thinking. But Harry said with a bitter face, "I can't quit the game, Gryffindor has no substitute seeker. If I quit, Gryffindor will not be able to play. If you are really worried that Professor Snape or someone else will harm you, then you should work hard to improve your magic level instead of daydreaming all day." Hermione tried hard to hold back from saying the name of Professor Quirrell. She said seriously, "Harry, we were supposed to go to the Umbrella House yesterday afternoon. I told everyone." "Yes, I'm sorry," Harry said embarrassedly, but Wood suddenly notified that we had to gather for training. "That's because it rained yesterday, and Hufflepuff didn't want the players' condition to be affected, so he cancelled the reservation, and then Wood hurriedly reserved the court," Hermione said dissatisfiedly, as if anyone would grab it. "Don't say that," Harry explained humbly. "Wood is also for the College Cup. If we can beat Hufflepuff in this game, we can lead Slytherin in the College Cup, which is the first time in 7 years. Harry was not so humble in front of his friends, but recently Hermione was willing to lend him her notes for reference, help him check his homework, guide him to complete the History of Magic paper, and teach him practical spells that he has not learned yet. Harry is not a heartless person. In fact, his personality is quite sensitive and lacks love. He can clearly feel that Hermione really cares about him and provides selfless help without asking for anything in return, so Harry's attitude naturally lowers again and again, and he rarely even breathes loudly in front of Hermione. "Hermione, is that Scamper so good? Why have we never heard of it?" Ron questioned. Hermione frowned. "Don't use that word. SSC means Star Chasers. I dare say that this is definitely the best study club in Hogwarts, at least for the first year." Ron showed an expression that looked like a toothache and study club. "As expected of you, Hermione." Harry fell into thought. Hogwarts students have formed many large and small clubs and clubs, such as the Gobstone Club or the Magical Herb Club. It is often seen that senior students go to club activities together. Harry and Ron have heard of some, but did not join any of them. It's just a place to kill time. Don't expect to learn anything useful. When a club invited Harry Potter to join, Ron once complained to him privately, "New members sometimes have to be difficult by old members. They will ask you to do something particularly difficult or embarrassing, and call it a test." Since Ron has 5 older brothers and he looks very experienced, Harry chose to trust his friends and declined all invitations to clubs. But now, it was another friend who was very important to him, who strongly recommended him a club that was said to significantly improve the level of magic. Given that Quirrell's classes were always so-so, Harry was actually looking forward to it. He hoped that he could use magic to solve problems at critical moments, and he also hoped that he could easily defeat some annoying guys, such as Malfoy. But Harry also had to consider Ron's feelings. He didn't want Ron to feel that he was abandoned, so he was always a little embarrassed. After eating and drinking, the dinner on the long table disappeared. Several people packed up and prepared to go back to the lounge. On the way, Hermione was still reminding Harry, "Comb your hair, leave a good impression on everyone." In the corridor, there was suddenly a burst of arrogant laughter, and there were also many students' booing voices. That laughter immediately awakened some deep memories of Harry, and he said disgustedly, "It's Malfoy, he must be bullying." Before he finished speaking, he rushed out, and Ron ran over immediately. Wait, Harry, calm down. Hermione stamped her feet and had to run after him. In the corridor, Neville was surrounded by a group of Slytherins. He held his wand and stammered, Malfoy, what do you want to do? Draco Malfoy tapped his palm with his wand and said with a smile, Longbottom, I just learned a new spell and want to find someone to practice the effect. Everyone laughed low and maliciously. Neville pointed his wand at him nervously. Don't come, I'll tell the professor. Stand still. As he retreated, Malfoy suddenly shouted, and the spell hit Neville, and his legs immediately stuck together tightly, as if they had become an inseparable pillar. Neville fell down immediately, his face flushed, and he tried to stand up, but he struggled on the ground like a dehydrated fish. The Slytherins laughed loudly, and a boy kicked his wand out with one foot. Draco Malfoy saluted triumphantly, like a magician who had performed successfully. He turned around and laughed, Tell the professor. Merlin, you are too timid. Longbottom, are you really a Gryffindor? Or did the Sorting Hat accidentally put you, a big fool, in the wrong place? Where should he go, Draco? A shrill-voiced girl deliberately asked loudly. Good question, Pansy, good question, let me think about it. Draco pretended to think and hesitated for a while, looked around, and asked, How about the trash can? Neville couldn't help but choked. The Slytherins were almost laughing like crazy. Let him go, Malfoy. Harry Potter rushed out of the corridor like a cannonball. Hearing Harry's voice, Malfoy hurriedly turned around, but before he could do so, Harry knocked him away. Malfoy bumped into Goyle, who was giggling beside him, and they both rolled to the ground. Harry Potter, Malfoy yelled angrily. Ron also ran over and stood next to Harry, confronting the others. His mind was racing. Slytherins were outnumbered, maybe they should run to the library. Harry, don't, oh, Neville. When Hermione saw Neville's appearance, her lips turned white with anger. She hurriedly went up to undo the spell for Neville. Neville finally stood up with Hermione's help. He was shaking all over and stared at the Slytherin student who was holding his wand, Theodore Nott. Under his fierce and angry gaze, Nott's feet quietly retreated a little. Too much. You, Hermione stared at everyone angrily and shouted, How could you do this to him? What does it matter? Malfoy stood up, patting the dirt on his body, and cursed angrily, You stinking mudblood. Before Harry could understand what was happening, he heard Ron and Neville roar and they all rushed forward. You will pay for what you said, Malfoy. Ron shouted. Don't say that word, don't. Neville also showed unprecedented courage and anger. Two fists smashed into Malfoy's face. The exquisite-looking Master Malfoy screamed, and blood spurted out from his nose. How dare you? Pansy Parkinson screamed, reaching out and grabbing Ron's robe, scratching his neck with her nails. The surrounding Slytherins did not stand still. Goyle kicked Neville in the stomach, and Nott kicked Ron away. Harry was stunned for a moment, then reacted immediately. When Crabbe hit Neville on the head with his fist, he pounced on him without hesitation. Slytherin and Gryffindor immediately got into a fight. They had no time to use spells and all spoke with their fists and kicks. After taking a brief advantage, the three Gryffindor boys quickly fell into a disadvantage. Although Hermione didn't understand what Malfoy was cursing, she did not hesitate to use the spell she was most familiar with. Wingardium Leviosa. The wands were waved vigorously, and the Slytherins present felt as if their robes were choking their throats. They were involuntarily pulled up by their own clothes, and after being suspended in the air for 2 or 3 seconds, there was another, bang, smashed to the ground. The three of them, Harry, who was pressed to the ground and beaten, looked at her in shock. Ah! Pansy hit her nose, she groaned in pain and cursed, You mudblood. Malfoy, whose face was covered with nosebleeds, rolled up from the ground, pulled out his wand, pointed it at Hermione and shouted, Take a stick with your front teeth. Stop. Harry quickly took out his wand and quickly remembered a spell he had seen in a book before. Tarantella. The two spells flew across the air, and Malfoy's spell hit Hermione. The girl whimpered and quickly reached out to cover her face, but her front teeth had already begun to grow at an alarming speed, extending past her lips towards her chin in the blink of an eye. Ha! Lee's spell hit Malfoy. Due to his lack of skill, the power of the spell only made Malfoy fall back. For a moment, spells were flying everywhere in the corridor, and students passing by kept away. But everyone soon discovered that most of their spells were not as powerful as their own fists and kicks, so the little wizard started punching and kicking them again. Hermione's teeth had reached her chin. She wanted to leave, but was stopped by Pansy Parkinson, so the brown-haired girl bumped into her decisively and gave him a hard headbutt, causing both of them to scream at the same time. Immobilis. All fixed. Suddenly a voice sounded in the corridor, and everyone's movements were frozen. At first glance, it seemed a bit funny. The professor is here. This thought flashed across the students at the same time, and they suddenly panicked. Only Neville shouted happily, "Vader!" Harry pushed Malfoy's face hard with one hand while still entangled with Nott. He was frozen in a particularly twisted posture. He tried his best to look to the side, only to see a slender figure stretched by the sunlight outside the window, silhouette. "Neville," Wade Grey said with a surprised voice. And, Hermione, what are you doing?" Before Neville could answer, he cast 2 spells in succession. Stop the spell immediately. Release your strength. A group of people were finally no longer frozen in ugly postures, but their hands and feet were weak and their bodies were weak. Harry almost hugged Malfoy. He quickly broke away and looked at the person. It was not just Vader Grey who came over, but also Michael Corner and Padma Patil from Ravenclaw, and Theo Mancini and Ryan Caro from Hufflepuff. The 4 colleges have cross-class classes. The students in the same grade are not strangers, but they are not very familiar either. They basically know each other but have not spoken to each other much. But even so, Harry and Ron also knew that the few people in front of them were among the top students in class. They were often praised and given extra points for their colleges. They had never heard of any bad deeds, and they were not like Wes. Brothers Lie also violated school rules. Especially Wade Grey. There seems to be no professor who doesn't like him, and he is also the inventor of the Book of Friends. Facing such peers, they naturally felt a sense of distance mixed with inferiority and powerlessness, as if an invisible shackle bound their hands, feet and temper. The Slytherins also climbed up one after another. Under the vigilant gaze of Michael and others, they looked at each other and did not continue to attack. Wade ignored these students. He was leaning down to pull Hermione, who had disheveled hair, up from the ground and check her long front teeth. Hermione wanted to block them with her palm, but it was not easy because the teeth were still growing and were almost up to her shoulders. The slender white teeth flashed, looking both scary and funny. The girl whimpered, touched her teeth in shock and fear, and tears came out of her eyes. "It's okay, Madame Pomfrey will cure it in 2 minutes." Wade comforted her, then took off his robe and covered Hermione's head. "Padma, please accompany Hermione to the school infirmary." "Okay, leave it to me." Padma responded decisively, helping Hermione leave, and by the way, she also helped her pull down her robe to cover the increasingly scary teeth, and also to block the prying and mocking eyes of others. The girls left, and Wade turned to the others, smiled, and said gently, "So who can tell me what happened here?" His face was calm, but there was no smile in his eyes. The atmosphere around him became tense in an instant. The Slytherins subconsciously avoided his gaze, and some of them took 2 steps back unconsciously. Only Malfoy managed to say, "This is a matter between our Slytherins and Gryffindors. Don't meddle in other people's business, Wade Grey." Draco Nott pulled his arm and whispered, "This is getting boring. Let's go." "It's because of me." Neville mustered up his courage and said with a slight tremor, "I met them on the road. Malfoy used the leg-locking spell on me. He said he wanted to find someone to practice that spell. Harry, and Ron and Hermione, to help me. He confronted Malfoy and the others, and then Malfoy called Hermione a mudblood." "Neville!" Michael shouted. Neville's voice stopped abruptly. He was at a loss for a moment, and then reacted in the eyes of others, looking at Wade with some panic. The people present suddenly realized that there was another person from a non-magical family here. Wade had never specifically said at school that his parents were squibs, only that they didn't know magic. Because in the eyes of wizards, there is no difference between squibs and muggles, even squibs are more discriminated against than muggles. Because muggles have made some remarkable and earth-shaking changes to the world, and what do squibs have? They are just rubbish abandoned by the wizarding world. When he first entered school, Wade was despised by some people because he was born in a non-magical family. But soon, he completely broke the prejudice of others with his strength. No one mentioned his bloodline anymore, and even many classmates thought that Wade was born in a pure-blood family and received elite wizard training since childhood. If not, it can't explain why they are compared to nothing. At this moment, everyone remembered again that Wade was also born in a non-magical family. The air suddenly became quiet, and the originally vague noise disappeared completely, so quiet that it seemed that you could hear your own breathing. Not let go of Malfoy's hand. So that's how it is, isn't it common for classmates to practice spells? Wade looked at Malfoy. I just learned a spell, and I want to ask classmate Malfoy for advice. If he yelled and rushed up angrily like Harry and the others, Malfoy would feel more at ease. But at this time, Wade just had a half-smile on his face, as if he was not angry at all, and Malfoy was scared instead. What? He clenched his wand and stammered. If Malfoy could look in the mirror, he would find that his expression now was very similar to that of Neville, who was surrounded before, and even more cowardly and guilty. Wade held up his wand, bowed slightly, and looked at the person in front of him with cold eyes. Mr. Malfoy. I refuse. Malfoy refused subconsciously. He pointed his wand at Wade and tried to explain. I mean Granger, I'm not scolding you, Longbottom said that just now. This person is really vicious and naive. Wade sighed in his heart and swung his wand. Expelliarmus. A dazzling red light flashed, and Malfoy was hit by the light of the spell and flew backwards, knocking Crabbe behind him. His wand also flew out of his hand and fell at Nott's feet with a snap. Nott looked around, but did not pick up the wand. Instead, he took 2 steps back. No one noticed him, and everyone looked at the blonde boy curled up on the ground. Pansy Parkinson wanted to do something, but was immediately pointed at by Michael with a smile. I don't usually hit girls, Pansy, don't make me an exception, Michael said in a gentle tone. Theo and Ryan stared at the other Slytherins, also ready to go. No one really did anything, even Malfoy's 2 fat followers. They looked at Malfoy on the ground stupidly, and didn't even think of helping him up. Malfoy covered his head and climbed up by himself. He looked at Wade hatefully and said loudly, Don't think I'm afraid of you, Wade Grey. Do you know who my father is? Wade just kicked his wand over and said, Go on. Malfoy picked up the wand, his arms trembling a little. He was angry and resentful, but more of a fear in his heart. The Wade Grey in front of him was not the nerd Granger. It was said that he knew more spells than some 5th-year students. I seem to have forgotten to count down to 3 just now. Wade said sarcastically. After all, I am also a mudblood, and I don't quite understand the etiquette of you pure-blood wizards. The word, mudblood, seemed to be a slap in the face of the Slytherin students, and everyone's expression was more or less embarrassed. If I remember correctly, count to 3, Malfoy, and then the first magic. Malfoy clenched his teeth, his eyes flickered. 1, 2. Just after counting to 2, Malfoy waved his wand vigorously and shouted, Legs stand still. Wade, who was well prepared, began to dodge the moment he opened his mouth. The beam of light from the spell hit Nott, who was pretending to be invisible next to him, and his legs immediately stuck and fell down. 3. Wade counted to 3 calmly and waved his wand again, Tarantella dance. Malfoy's legs immediately twitched, as if he was doing a happy dance, but he still wanted to attack Vader, and his lower and upper body were completely twisting in 2 directions. In this way, he quickly followed Nott's footsteps, his waist twisted with a loud bang, and he fell down. Even so, his legs still twitched rapidly in the air, pulling on his sprained waist, causing Malfoy to moan loudly. This look was so funny that even some of the Slytherin students accidentally laughed out loud. Malfoy's pale face turned red, and he glared at him with murderous eyes. But from this angle, everyone seemed to be just a messy patch of color in his field of vision. The once familiar faces had become unfamiliar and cold. He couldn't tell who was laughing at him. Vader deliberately waited for a while the Slytherins just watched. To other unrelated students, this situation seemed as if they were a group of people bullying Malfoy who was alone. When Malfoy was about to burst into tears, Vader walked over and lifted the spell. He squatted next to him and sincerely asked Malfoy, who was covered in cold sweat and extremely embarrassed. Bullying people, is it fun? Malfoy looked at him with fearful eyes, breathing rapidly but saying nothing. Wade smiled and stood up. The Slytherin students separated themselves and watched him leave with the others. No one spoke, no one stopped. Harry, let's go too. Ron pulled Harry and dragged him through the corridor in the direction that Wade and the others left. The two people who were originally in the center of the melee no longer paid much attention to them, and the two escaped smoothly. When turning the corner, Harry looked back and saw Pansy and Goyle trying to pull Malfoy, but he slapped them away. The originally proud blonde boy was now covered in dust and wiped his nose bleed fiercely. The other Slytherins surrounded him and comforted him with a smile. Harry could see the hypocrisy and carelessness on their faces even across the corridor. All along, Harry felt that Malfoy was the worst person he had ever met except Snape, even more annoying than his cousin Daly. But at this moment, he suddenly realized that Malfoy was not as responsive as he had thought before, and he didn't seem to have many true friends in Slytherin. Then, the wall blocked his view. "What are you looking at?" Ron asked curiously. "Nothing." Harry turned his head and said, "I was just thinking, if I was facing an enemy I couldn't defeat, you and Hermione would definitely stand by me and fight with me." Of course, Ron thought he was talking about Malfoy and his bullying of Neville, and immediately said indignantly, "Slytherin has always been so annoying, we will never give in. We can't let them get too proud. Neville is just too timid, he has to be brave." "He is very brave, have you forgotten? He beat up Malfoy with you, for Hermione, punch that guy in the nose." Oh, yes. Ron was still very excited when he thought of the scene just now. Neville finally looks like a Gryffindor. Did you see Malfoy's expression just now? I think he's about to cry. Ron's words made Harry a little uncomfortable. Although Malfoy definitely deserved it, this scene always reminded him of the time when he was chased by Daly and his men. As they were talking, they saw the figures of Wade and others from a distance. When they stood together, it seemed that a strange aura formed between the ordinary classmates, making it difficult for others to participate easily. Harry's footsteps suddenly stopped. "Ron, what?" "They are SSC, the extracurricular study group that Hermione recommended me to join," Harry said in a very light tone. Ron suddenly became a little uncomfortable, and the smile disappeared from his face. He stammered, Yes, I want to join." Harry suddenly made up his mind. "I want to learn some real skills and practice real spells, instead of reading texts in class with Quirrell." "It's good. I mean, you really should go. Maybe you can join the ranks of top students in the future." Ron didn't look at Harry, and his tone was not like himself. "Aren't you going, Ron?" Harry asked in surprise. "I wasn't invited. Hermione only recommended you." Ron forced a smile and said, "Just go, I might. I think I need to go to the infirmary. I guess Crabbe might have broken my ribs. Maybe Hermione just forgot to tell us. Let's go and ask together." Harry pulled Ron towards the people over there. "Don't, Harry." Ron looked reluctant and was just being dragged by Harry, so Harry pulled him over without much effort. Ron had a vague hope in his heart. Maybe it was just Hermione who forgot to mention it to him. After all, he and Harry were inseparable, and others always regarded them as a group. Maybe they felt that there was no need to say more, and just now, they fought with Neville. The two walked over and heard Wade say to others, "Neville, you have to go to the infirmary to see Madame Pomfrey. Your arm may be fractured. Everyone should be careful of Slytherin's revenge during this period. Don't be alone." "Wade, what about you?" Theo asked with concern. "I'll go to Professor Flitwick to receive the punishment. Using a spell on a classmate in the corridor, a detention is inevitable anyway." Wade said. "You go." "Oh." Michael was surprised at first, then nodded in agreement. "That's the way it should be." "Why?" Ron approached and said puzzledly. "If the professor didn't see it, it means it didn't happen. Why go and turn yourself in?" Harry and Theo both nodded in agreement, and Ryan was thoughtful. "You don't think Malfoy will not complain after suffering such a big loss?" Michael reminded. "It's better to turn yourself into Professor Flitwick than to be punished by Professor Snape later." "That's right, if it's Professor Snape, maybe he will be deducted several dozen points and put in detention for a month." Neville nodded with lingering fear. In the potion class, Professor Snape was always very harsh on Neville, causing Neville to have a psychological shadow on Professor Snape. "Then let's go together," Ryan said. "We can't let the professor think it's all your fault. You didn't do anything." Wade saw Neville opening his mouth to speak, shook his head and said, "Neville, you are the one who was bullied. If you are punished for this, it's too unfair. go to the school infirmary early and see Hermione by the way." He waved his hand and turned to leave. Harry opened his mouth. He wanted to ask Ron if he could join the SSC, but found that he had no chance to speak. Seeing that Wade had left, he had to say, "Then let's go together." At this moment, he realized that everywhere on his body hurt terribly, and he was surprised that he didn't realize it just now. Vader knew that Professor Flitwick should be in the staff room at this time. He came to the first floor of the castle, knocked on the door, and soon heard Professor McGonagall's voice, "Please come in." At the same time, the door was opened automatically. When Vader saw that Professor McGonagall, Professor Snape and Professor Flitwick were all in the lounge, he stopped and hesitated. Professor Flitwick was correcting his homework. When he looked up and saw Vader, he suddenly smiled. "Vade. What are the questions today?" Wade walked in and said with some embarrassment, I have some questions to ask, but more importantly, Professor, I am here to receive a punishment for violating school rules." "Penalty." Professor Flitwick's face was full of surprise, and the other two professors also looked over. After teaching for so many years, they have never seen a student who voluntarily surrendered after making a mistake, unless they had an ulterior motive. "What have you done, Vader?" Professor Flitwick asked gently. Vader was about to stop talking and looked at the other two professors. It was not that he was afraid of getting into trouble with Professor Snape, but in this way, his original actions to avoid trouble seemed a bit like suing a child. Vader suddenly felt that the words, "evildoers report first," seemed to flash above his head. He is obviously not a bad person. Professor McGonagall noticed that there was something hidden, and his expression suddenly became serious. "Mr. Gray, I think all professors have the right to know about students' behavior that violates school rules." "Okay," Vader had to say. "That's it, Professor." Wade finished speaking in detail, without adding any exaggeration or embellishment. Even so, Professor McGonagall was still so angry that her nostrils were flaring, as if she could spit out fire at any time. She said angrily, "Bullying classmates, and calling those insulting names. We will never allow this kind of behavior. Severus, I will give Mr. Malfoy a month's confinement, at least." Professor Snape didn't know what he was thinking, his face was pale and empty. After hearing Professor McGonagall's words, he was lost for a while, and then slowly said, "Of course, you were right. Minerva, just do this." "Very good." Professor McGonagall breathed out, and when she turned to look at Vader, her stern expression finally softened a little. "Mr. Gray." "Yes, Professor." Wade lowered his head. "I know you shouldn't use magic spells on classmates in the corridor." "Ahem." Professor Flitwick suddenly coughed twice. "Yes, you are too impulsive. What if you get hurt? For your recklessness, I will deduct one. Professor Flitwick glanced secretly at the two colleagues next to him. 5 points, he said cruelly, gritting his teeth, and winked at Wade quietly, indicating that, "Don't worry, we will come back later." Professor McGonagall smiled imperceptibly and said, "Well, of course, at the same time, for bravely defending your classmates and successfully using the disarming spell, I will give you 10 points, Mr. Gray. I can see that. You, are very good at learning magic." Added 10 points. In the Umbrella House, Michael was also very surprised by the result. Actually, only 5 points were added, because before that, Professor Flitwick deducted 5 points. Vader emphasized. "I know. But, that's Professor McGonagall. Michael was quite incredible. She doesn't even favor Gryffindors. It is precisely because Professor McGonagall is very fair that I gave Ravenclaw 10 points." Padma was not surprised. Think about what Malfoy did, a month of confinement is really. It's easier for him. Not only that, they didn't get much benefit from Professor Snape. Theo said a piece of news that no one knew. Some people saw the Slytherins going to Professor Snape to complain. He was kicked out in less than 2 minutes. Ryan nodded understandingly. Even if Professor Snape is usually very strict, he won't favor Slytherin unreasonably, right? Neville probably didn't agree very much. He felt that if they could also see how Snape found fault with Gryffindor and Slytherin in the potions class, they probably wouldn't have such a problem. This is a view that is far from reality. While everyone was chatting, the door to the Umbrella House suddenly opened. There was only one person coming at this time. Padma happily raised her hand and shouted, "Hermione." The brown-haired girl walked in from the door with cheerful steps and said with a bright smile, "Good afternoon, guys." Huh, Padma looked at her with some confusion. "Hermione, why do I feel like you are a little different today?" No, Hermione pulled back her hair on her temples and said covertly, "Maybe it's because I heard that Malfoy learned a lesson." She was a little too happy. Well, Padma was doubtful. Is this really the reason? Michael could tell at a glance. Hermione used to have a particularly obvious pair of large set teeth, and her messy brown hair made her look like a beaver. But when Hermione smiled today, her teeth were neat and normal-sized, and she looked much cuter than usual. "Wow, Hermione," Michael praised without saying what he discovered, "you look really radiant today." Hermione smiled shyly, and in order to divert attention, she turned and shouted to the person behind her, "Come in, Harry." Harry Potter, who was hesitating outside the door, finally walked in. Everyone looked at him, and the boy pulled his hair uncomfortably. This is of course not the first time they have met, but it is normal to see classmates in the classroom, and to see the new member in their turf, or circle, is Harry Potter. This still makes them. There was a strange and special feeling in my heart. For a moment no one spoke. Harry was a little embarrassed, and he said hello at a loss. Hello everyone. I am Harry Potter." Then he realized in despair, what a stupid sentence this is. They went to school together for more than half a year. Is there anyone who doesn't know each other? Hermione kept telling him to leave a good impression on everyone, but it seemed that he was messed up by his stupidity in the first step. They must think it's weird for him to talk like this, right? Looks so silly. Do you want to get acquainted again? Vader stood up first, stretched out his hand and said with a smile, "Hello, Harry, I am Vader Grey. If you were the only one to do a stupid thing, you would be embarrassed to the point of touching your toes, but if there were others like you, the embarrassment would seem to be nothing." Harry shook Vader's hand gratefully. Then Michael Corner also extended his hand. "Welcome, I am Michael Corner. Actually I have wanted to say it for a long time, your action of catching the golden snitch on the court last time was very cool. I look forward to your performance next time." "Thank you." Harry smiled shyly. "Welcome to join you, Harry, I am Theo Mancini." Theo said with a smile. "The person who will compete with you next time will be Hufflepuff. I can only wish you enjoy the game and hope that Hufflepuff will win. Patch can win." At this moment, Harry really wished he could say something witty and humorous in response, but as he was not good at words, all he could think of suddenly was Wood's passionate speech in the rain. "Hufflepuff is nothing to worry about." "No, you can't say that. Beat Hufflepuff. Get the house cup. Enough. He doesn't want to offend everyone yet. We must go all out. For the first time in 7 years. Let Professor McGonagall be impressed." Wood raised his arms and shouted. "Harry, I will definitely do my best." Harry finished his words before his mind could react. Theo smiled. "That's how it should be. Ryan Carlo." Ryan shook hands. His smile was shallow but sincere. "Although I have never joined any other societies, I want to say that SSC must be the best." "Of course," Harry said quickly. "Padma Patil." Padma smiled and shook hands. "My only request is that you don't recognize me as my sister." "I won't admit it," Harry said firmly. Unlike the Weasley twins who seemed to be copied and pasted, the differences between the Patil sisters are actually very conspicuous. Even though they have very similar appearances, their personalities, temperaments and expressions are very different, making it impossible for anyone to tell them apart. "Then, it's me in the end." Hermione also shook hands in a decent manner and said with a smile, "Your friend is also a partner of the SSC." "Oh, Hermione," Harry couldn't help laughing. At this moment, Harry had completely forgotten all the thoughts he had when he entered. In the playful welcome ceremony, he truly felt that he was being accepted into a group, which was completely different from his friendship with Ron, or the curiosity that some classmates admired him because of his reputation as a savior. Harry couldn't explain what this difference was at the moment. He only knew that he was in a good mood, as if he had landed on a soft cloud. After the brief welcome ceremony, Harry said with a bit of nervousness and anticipation, "Well, actually this is my first time to join the club, so I don't know much about it. What are the rules of the SSC club? Do I need to do anything?" Everyone looked at each other. "Society?" Theo asked confusedly. "Are we already considered a club?" Neville was surprised. Isn't the SSC a club? I thought it had been a long time ago. If students form a club, do they have to report it to the professor? Ryan asked with some uncertainty. Michael, I thought we were a club. The club has to pay dues, right? We haven't paid any money, Ryan said based on what he learned from his Muggle relatives. Neville was a little confused. I said, what is the difference between a club and a society? Everyone was silent for a moment. Yes, apart from the name, what's the difference? They couldn't tell for a moment. Harry never expected that such a scene would occur. He carefully thought about how things could turn out like this, and then looked at Hermione silently beside him. Wade looked at Hermione, who was suppressing her laughter, and asked helplessly, Hermione, what did you tell Harry? Hermione suddenly burst out laughing, waved her hand and said to Harry, I didn't say anything. It was all yours and Ron's guess, right? Harry, yes, she didn't say anything, but repeatedly emphasized that this matter was very important, so he should be cautious and prepared. She also reminded him that he must bring a wand, and then watched them uneasily, guessing that joining the club would have consequences. What a test. Ron even put forward a particularly outrageous guess. Maybe they'll let you sneak into Snape's office and steal one of his belongings, like underwear or socks. Or throw a dung bomb into the corridor in front of Professor McGonagall to prove your courage. Quote. At that time, Ron looked at Harry with a tragic look, as if he was about to be torn apart by the angry professor. Thinking about it carefully, Hermione's expression was painful at that time. He thought it was a painful expression, but she was actually suppressing a laugh, right? Or, was it because of their various demonizing conjectures that Hermione didn't say anything? It's like this, Wade couldn't help but laugh. We can actually only be regarded as an after-school study group. We get together to practice spells, discuss homework problems, or borrow each other's notes. Generally speaking, for example, we will study here after dinner, but you can come and go as you like. If you don't want to come, you don't need to ask anyone for leave. If there are no fixed rules, they will be posted on the wall behind you. Harry turned his head and looked at it. There was a piece of paper pinned to the wall, with only a few short words written on it. For example, members should help each other, be united and friendly, and not touch other people's things. Basically, elementary school students should. The only special thing about the basic moral standards that are observed is that no one else can be brought into the umbrella house without the consent of all members. Harry felt very relaxed at first. These rules were not rules at all, and there were no strong punishments or constraints. Obviously their previous guesses were all wrong, but when he saw the next one, Harry felt a sudden change in his heart. Shen. He is also new here. Can you introduce Ron to join? Harry, your seat is here. Neville took Harry aside enthusiastically. An empty table has been prepared next to Neville's seat, and there are independent bookshelves and cabinets on the side. The surrounding wooden boards form a semi-enclosed structure, which can block other people's sight, and can also be lowered to facilitate communication. There are several small tea tables, food cabinets and soft old sofas nearby. There are several soft pillows on the sofa. Vader asked Zoe and the others to help prepare these things. The old furniture in the room of requirement almost formed a small town. He picked out the relatively intact ones and patched them together to repair them, so that they looked like new ones. The pantry was always filled with cakes, biscuits, puddings and candies, and several dark silver tin jugs filled with drinks and water, all of which the house elves took the initiative to prepare for them. Not only that, when the elves have free time, they will also find ways to decorate the umbrella house. Wade and the others would often find a small change in the umbrella house as soon as they entered the door. It might be that there were some strange decorations and photos on the wall, or there were a few pots of wild flowers blooming in the corner. It may also be the addition of one or two useful pieces of furniture. Unknowingly, this originally empty abandoned classroom has become more and more full. There are traces of several people living and studying here everywhere. There is a warm and lively atmosphere in the room. Harry fell in love with this place almost at first sight. He also got a piece of parchment on which SSC members communicate with each other. The Book of Friends is something almost everyone knows about now, but Harry, who stayed at school for Christmas, had money but nowhere to buy it. Among the people he knew around him, Hermione had one. She gave Harry one to contact him, but they were together all day long and rarely used it. Ron had 2 copies, one of which was the same. It was from Hermione, the other was sent to him by Mrs. Weasley after the holidays, and each of the Weasley children had one. Ron often used the friend's book to chat or quarrel with his brothers before going to bed, only to be sternly ordered to go to bed immediately by Mrs. Weasley. Ron sometimes complained about his mother's strictness, but Harry envied him very much. Now, he also had a second friend book. He put 2 pieces of parchment between his textbook and stuffed them into his school bag, then looked around. Everyone else had already started doing homework or reading books consciously, even Neville was copying Transfiguration notes seriously. This was also very different from studying in the common room. In the Gryffindor common room, there were always students making noises, and some people were looking for others to copy homework. There was no such quiet and strong learning atmosphere. If they wanted to do their homework seriously, they had to go to the library, but Madame Pants was very strict and did not allow eating or talking, which was another inconvenience. Harry calmed down and took out the homework for the charms class and started writing, but he only wrote a title and he didn't know how to write. He should have borrowed 2 reference books from the library first. But everyone was studying, and would it be abrupt if he left suddenly? Maybe Hermione has books. When Harry began to look around uncomfortably, Theo nearby noticed his dilemma and asked, "I don't know how to write it." Harry subconsciously covered the scribbled notes and graffiti on the textbook with his hands, and said embarrassedly, "Yeah, right. It doesn't matter, we don't know how to do it at the beginning." Theo comforted him, "You can find Wade, he will teach you how to write a paper and what reference books you need to read now. Before you come tomorrow, go to the library to borrow books. Follow Wade's method, and you will soon find that completing homework is actually very simple." In fact, the person who reads the most books is Hermione, but Hermione is used to writing down what she has read. In her eyes, all the knowledge she has learned is the key point. While Wade can point out what their current problems are and what knowledge needs to be strengthened, and then pick out the most valuable book for them to read. Basically, after reading the books he pointed out, those knowledge points that were originally half understood became simple, as if suddenly everything was understood. As he got closer, Theo also saw the messy notes on Harry's book. After hesitating for a moment, he pointed at the book and asked, "If you don't mind, can you let me see it?" "Well, I didn't listen very carefully in class." Harry's face heated up and he pushed the book away in shame. Well, Theo actually saw this. He flipped through Harry's textbook and sighed. "Your notebook lacks a lot of content and misses the point." So, he raised his hand and raised his voice, "Guys." Everyone looked up at them. "Harry needs to borrow everyone's notes," Theo said, then added, "if you're not using them right now." "Okay, I'm still a little confident in potions class. Just return it to me before next Monday." Michael sent his potions class notes over with a levitating spell. "What I'm good at is astronomy," Ryan said. He not only borrowed notes, but also borrowed a book about the movement of stars. Neville also took out his notes. "In terms of herbal medicine, Theo and I are actually pretty much the same." "No, Neville, you learn better," Theo said seriously. "Professor Sprout is full of praise for you." Neville blushed a little, rubbed the back of his head and smiled shyly. "I can lend you the notes from the history of magic and transfiguration classes for reference at any time," Hermione said. "Then I have the remaining charms class and defense against the dark arts." Wade directed a few notebooks to float over and said, "I guess you also need to learn how to write a paper." Harry nodded hurriedly and stammered, "Yes. I am not very good at writing papers." Afterwards, Theo whispered to Harry, "Take good care of Wade's notes, especially defense against the dark arts. His notes are more comprehensive and easier to understand than what Professor Quirrell teaches in class." "Thank you, Theo," Harry said gratefully. "You're welcome." Theo smiled gently. "We are companions now, aren't we?" A paper on the softening curse can actually start from these 5 aspects. Future papers will also be written according to this model: brief introduction, historical background, development and changes. As Wade spoke, he drew a mind map on the paper. Starting from the title, he listed 5 parts as the framework of the paper, and each part was further refined into 2 or 3 small points. No one had ever systematically taught Harry how to write a paper. In fact, most students at Hogwarts have not received any training in this area. Smart students gradually sum up their own methods through homework after homework, while stupid students either refer to the former's homework or piece it together. So perfunctory. In the public elementary school that Harry attended, homework was basically decoration, although they sometimes wrote essays, topic essays, narrative essays, or argumentative essays, etc. They wrote quite freely and the number of words was very small, unlike Hogwarts's paper, which frequently measures in feet, is completely different. At this moment, after hearing Wade's explanation, Harry felt that his mind suddenly became clearer, and the original chaos and confusion disappeared instantly. Every time Wade listed an item, some corresponding content popped up in his mind, and he suddenly understood how to complete this kind of homework. By the time Vader finished speaking, Harry couldn't wait to write down all the thoughts in his mind. He even felt that the 7 inches assigned by the professor was a bit short and not enough for him to write everything he wanted to write. Of course, when he actually started writing, he found that writing his ideas into a paper was not that simple, but completing the assignment was still much easier than before. Then came the charms exercises, which were 100 times easier for Harry than writing the essay. He himself has outstanding talent, and with only a little guidance from Vader, he showed extraordinary magical acumen and understanding, and quickly mastered basic spells, which surprised everyone except Vader. Under everyone's admiring gazes, Harry's heart was filled with joy, and he felt that his body seemed to become light and airy. He pursed his lips slightly, trying not to appear arrogant and complacent, but the restraint and uneasiness he felt when approaching the classroom, as well as the inferiority and shame he felt when he saw other people's notes, were all gone, and his green eyes revealed an indescribable energy and brilliance. "I'm really good at this," Harry said to himself. Wade looked at the time and saw that there was only half an hour left before curfew. He clapped his hands, and everyone who was practicing the spell stopped. "Everyone," Vader looked at everyone and said, "a few days ago we had a little conflict with the Malfoys. Although they were the unlucky ones in the end, we also suffered a little loss." His eyes swept over Harry, Neville, and Hermione. "Then I discovered a problem. Learning spells does not actually mean that we can protect ourselves. If we lack actual combat ability and cannot react in time when encountering an attack, we will easily suffer losses." "You mean," Michael became excited, "we should train actual combat capabilities?" "No, it can't be." Padma suddenly panicked. Hermione hesitated for a moment, then was eager to give it a try. "What if we get injured? We will get points deducted by the professor." "Don't keep thinking about house points, Hermione, house points are not that important at all. How cool is this?" Michael couldn't wait anymore. "Shall we start now, Vader?" Vader noticed the changes in everyone's expressions, and then said, "Of course we can't just start like this. I think everyone should have mastered at least a few small evil spells, but those kind of spells should not be used on companions. It's very troublesome to treat it, and it might even bother Madame Pomfrey, so we need to master 2 basic defensive spells and attack spells before we can practice." "What spell?" Harry asked expectantly. Vader looked at him and said, "The Disarming Curse and the Iron Armor Curse." "Iron Armor Charm," Hermione said in surprise. "We don't learn this spell until 5th grade. Harry was also surprised. He was surprised that Hermione actually knew the content of their 5th grade textbooks. She couldn't have read all the upper grade textbooks, right? As for Vader, Harry couldn't be shocked anymore. He felt that even if Vader said that he could teach everyone how to apparate, Harry would choose to believe it first. Indeed, because the Iron Armor Curse is relatively difficult, you have to wait until the 5th grade to learn it. "I just learned it a few days ago," Wade showed off unintentionally, and then said, "But this spell is very practical and can be used in an invisible shield forms around the body, deflecting enemy spells, but it cannot resist very powerful spells, so be careful." Harry subconsciously touched the scar on his forehead. Neville pursed his lips and looked serious. "As for the disarming spell, which is Expelliarmus, it can make the opponent lose their wand, and it is also a very useful spell. Because most wizards have not mastered wandless magic, losing the wand is almost no threat." Vader's wand turned in a circle in his hand, and then he held it and looked at everyone. "So, let's start with the disarming spell." In the original book, Harry learned the disarming spell in the dueling club in his 2nd year. According to Lockhart, this was not actually what they were supposed to learn according to the curriculum. In the 4th grade, I learned the Iron Armor Curse in advance in order to participate in the Goblet of Fire. In 5th grade, He taught others in DA how to learn the iron armor curse. Hermione learned it before Neville. Therefore, the iron armor curse is something that is only learned in 5th grade at least. As night fell, Harry and Hermione returned to the Gryffindor common room together. Neville accidentally broke his head during spell practice, so he had to go to the school infirmary to see Madame Pomfrey for treatment. At this time, only 2 or 3 students were still on the sofa. The fire in the fireplace jumped in the hearth, casting mottled and swaying shadows on the wall, like a mysterious and ancient painting. "Good night, Harry," Hermione said. "Rest early tonight." "Okay, good night." Harry watched Hermione walk to the girls' dormitory, and he himself walked happily along the spiral staircase to the boys' dormitory, and couldn't help jumping twice when no one saw him. In the study tonight, only Harry successfully disarmed his opponent. This was the first time he learned a spell faster than Hermione. Almost no one else could cast a spell smoothly. By the end, Hermione only made her opponent take 2 steps back. Then it was Michael, who made his opponent flinch. But that might be because the beam of light from the wand was a little scary. Harry remembered the surprised and admiring eyes of the crowd, not because he was Harry Potter, or because he was a boy who survived, but because of his talent in learning spells. Each member of the SSC had his own specialty. Harry originally thought that he had nothing to say except Quidditch, but now he knew that he should be very good at defense against the dark arts spells. Wade praised him. He was a practical genius. And all this joy ended the moment he pushed open the dormitory door. Ron leaned against the head of the bed, flipping through a magazine, and he didn't look up when he heard the door open. Seamus and Dean were probably asleep, and the figures lying in the curtains made even breathing sounds. The atmosphere in the dormitory was a little unusual. Harry suddenly remembered that he had promised Ron before he went there, if Wade and others also welcomed Ron to join the SSC, he would send a message in the friend book and Ron would go there immediately. Harry noticed that Ron was still wearing the clothes he wore when he went out, and had not changed into pajamas. "Hi, Ron," Harry greeted dryly, almost wanting to run away. Ron looked up at him and asked slowly, "Is it over? How are your club activities?" "It's okay," Harry said a little stiffly. "I learned the disarming spell." He didn't know why he added the last sentence. When he said it, he couldn't catch up with the sound, and Harry immediately regretted it. "Then did you ask for me?" Ron asked. "You must have asked, right? Even if they don't agree, it doesn't matter, you can tell me the truth, I can accept it." Harry didn't know what to say. I didn't. Number. Ron raised his eyebrows. "SSC has a rule that we can't let anyone join at will. Everyone must agree. I'm just a newcomer, so." Harry stammered, and he didn't think he was convincing. "Oh," Ron said coldly, "I understand." He pulled the curtains shut, lay down and covered himself with the quilt. Harry stood alone by the door, feeling mixed emotions. A white ball of light slowly floated to the candlestick and fixed on it, illuminating the entire dormitory. Wade sat in front of the window and began to check the messages in the friend account. The friend account cannot retain text for a long time. If someone checks the message in time, the text will disappear from the page soon. If it is not opened, the text will disappear in half an hour at most. So his parents and friends usually choose to communicate before going to bed. Zoe. Zoe is very grateful for the candy given by Wade Gray. Zoe shared it with friends, and McGee and Tess will try to copy it. Wade Gray will also be able to eat them at the breakfast table. Stephen. I have collected some information about bird snakes and sent it to you. I hope it will be helpful to you. By the way, Mr. Scamander wrote back to me and said that I am welcome to help. I am so happy, Wade. I never thought that this day would come. This is all thanks to you. Fortunately, you reminded me, my friend. Marchoni. Regarding the revision of the Friends book, I hope to meet with you in person. Can we meet in Hogsmeade on Saturday? I know that only the third year can get permission to go out, but maybe Professor Murray can take you out. In fact, I also know a secret passage that leads to the outside of the school. Ferdinand. Wade, I received a reply from the person you mentioned. Wade's eyes lit up and he wrote quickly on the parchment. Wade. Remus Lupin. Ferdinand. Yes, just like what you requested. he claimed in the letter that he was proficient in most of the defense against the dark arts, including the Patronus charm, had excellent grades in transfiguration, was familiar with the practice of animagus, and could accept a weekly salary of 10 galleons. The letter was signed by Remus Lupin. I have an appointment with him to meet at the Leaky Cauldron tomorrow. Wade let out a long breath and couldn't help but smile. He could ask Professor Flitwick about the content of Defense Against the Dark Arts, but he couldn't always ask him. Because Professor Flitwick had to teach, correct homework, manage Ravenclaw College, and sometimes patrol the castle. When he was free, he had to go to the bar with friends for a drink and relax. Wade couldn't always occupy his time, and the same was true for Professor Murray. During the Christmas holidays, Professor Flitwick gave Wade a copy of the Compendium of Spells, but later he found out that it was actually an abridged version. Most of the dark magic, curses and poison spells were deleted by Professor Flitwick, and he also removed some spells that he thought Wade should not be exposed to at present, such as apparition, disillusionment, animagus, portkey, etc. Professor Flitwick's attitude was very clear. Although he thought Wade was outstanding in spells, he also insisted that as a first-year student, he should learn and master those safe and harmless spells, and advanced magic should be learned step by step in the senior year. Wade didn't want to argue with the professor whether his concern was what he needed, because Professor Flitwick was originally a very decent and kind person. But among the things Wade wanted to learn, there were some things that Professor Flitwick could never teach him. And if he practiced by himself, even if he had the bonus of the golden finger, it would be quite dangerous. In each chapter of the textbook, more than half of the content usually emphasizes the same thing. Failed spells can have extremely serious consequences, some of which kill wizards, some turn humans into non-human creatures, and some cause damage that magic cannot reverse. So he needs a teacher. A teacher who is highly skilled, trustworthy, and not so conventional. Is there a better choice than Remus Lupin? Chapter 71. Vade. Dad, if you determine that he is a trustworthy person during the interview, please tell him. I will meet him at the Three Broomsticks pub in Hogsmeade Village this Saturday morning. Ferdinand, can you leave school? Vade, I have a way. Ferdinand, is it safe? Vade, don't worry, Hogsmeade is always under the watchful eye of Mr. Dumbledore. There is a moving magical photo between the pages of the book. The love in the parent's eyes and the happy smile on the child's face are all permanently recorded by the camera. Ferdinand stared for a long time before closing the friend's account. Although the words disappeared from the paper, they were engraved in his mind. When bidding farewell at the station, the father and son faintly unveiled a veil called whitewashing the piece. From then on, Wade gradually began to write some facts that had been hidden from them in the friend's account. For example, Slytherin still advocates the supremacy of pure blood and often conflicts with Gryffindor. For example, he plans to start practicing more difficult spells with several classmates to prepare for the future. Vader also asked Ferdinand for help and published a recruitment advertisement in the Daily Prophet. The delivery address was a guest room in the Leaky Cauldron. Ferdinand reserved this room for a month and would come every day after get off work to read the letters he received. The bar owner Tom looks difficult to get along with on the outside, but he is actually a warm-hearted person who helps him organize various application letters every day. The conditions listed in the advertisement were very harsh, but the salary was only average. Even so, there were many letters sent from all directions every day. Vader specifically reminded him that some wizards would include curses or harmful potions in the letters, so that he should not open the letters himself. In fact, there is no need for Vader to remind him that Ferdinand himself is very wary of magic. He specially spent a sum of money to ask the bar owner Tom to help check whether the letters were safe. Ferdinand believed that it was possible to open a bar in a traffic thoroughfare like Diagon Alley and operate it safely with extremely poor hygiene until now. Boss Tom's magic level must be quite high. In the letter, some people attached their grades when they graduated from Hogwarts and asked for a salary increase. Others boasted about their abilities, but could not provide any effective proof other than their own bragging. But it didn't matter. From the beginning, Ferdinand knew that this recruitment advertisement was actually for one person. Wade heard the wizard's name from somewhere, and insisted on hiring only this person. No matter how beautiful someone else's resume is, it's impossible to get hired. And now, that person is finally here. Ferdinand decided to take care of this for his son. If this guy named Remus Lupin was just a facade, or if his character was questionable, Ferdinand would not let him stay with his son under any circumstances. Tuck, tuck, tuck. There was a knock on the guest room door, and the boss Tom's voice came from outside the door. Mr. Gray, Mr. Lupin has arrived at the bar. Okay, I'll come right away. Ferdinand took a deep breath, straightened his collar, and walked out. Arriving at the bar on the first floor, Ferdinand, under the guidance of boss Tom, saw the man, brown hair mixed with white hair, and an extremely worn wizard robe with a few patches on it. He looked young, but his face was haggard and old, like one of those middle-aged unemployed guys holding up signs in Canary Wharf looking for work. Ferdinand frowned. A wizard who seemed to have problems even with his basic ability to make a living, this was his first impression of Remus Lupin. According to Ferdinand's understanding of magic, it should be much easier for wizards to make money reasonably and legally than for muggles. How bad do they have to be to not be able to afford new clothes? Or, does he think wearing a little shabby clothing will arouse more sympathy from his employer? But this is who Vader wants to find. Ferdinand walked over anyway. The wizard noticed the movement from a distance and looked up keenly. Although he looked exhausted, his eyes showed calmness and peace, and his movements of holding the wand quickly and covertly made him look very alert. Ferdinand suddenly understood. This was indeed the man Wade had been waiting for a long time. Hey, that's weird, Padma muttered as she flipped through the newspaper during breakfast time. What's weird? Michael, who was eating pie, asked vaguely. A recruitment advertisement I saw in the newspaper every day has disappeared. Padma tilted her head, as if trying to find the missing advertisement in the newspaper. We've hired someone, Michael said nonchalantly. Impossible, Padma said doubtfully. We also discussed it in the dormitory. It's 10 galleons per week. Logically speaking, we shouldn't be able to recruit wizards of that level. Wade said nothing and finished his breakfast quietly. After class, Wade walked up the stairs alone. The changing stairs took him to the 5th floor. After searching for a while, Wade finally found the person on the other side that Marchione mentioned in the letter. What a tall mirror. Wade tapped the mirror with his wand and whispered, Mostrar la verdad, the true manifestation. The mirror suddenly flipped over, revealing a dark passage behind it. Vader lit up his wand with a fluorescent spell, walked in and took a look, and was stunned. There was only a few steps of open space in front of him. Further forward, the passage completely collapsed. Gravel, bricks and soil blocked the originally spacious passage. Traces of black magic could even be seen on the walls. Someone used a very dangerous explosive spell here to completely blow up this secret passage. Wade exited silently, restored the mirror, and then took out the Book of Friends. Vade. The passage collapsed. Marchione. What? I could still use it when I was in school. Didn't the castle's magic prevent it from collapsing? Marchione. Forget it, I also know a secret passage behind the portrait of Paracelsus on the 6th floor. It's easy to find him. He wears a furry red hat and is chubby. He likes people to chat with him. If you talk to him about alchemy or divination, he will be willing to tell you anything. Vader. I always feel that Marchione's life as a student was also colorful. He climbed up the stairs and easily found the portrait that was so boring that he clasped his fingers. Wade was about to talk to him when he suddenly felt a hidden gaze. He turned his head and saw Mrs. Loris squatting on the ground, licking her paws and staring at him dimly from the corner of her eye. Mrs. Norris is the pet cat of the castle administrator Filch. Just like her owner, she is old and thin, and her fur has lost its luster, but she is still sensitive and responsive. Once it finds a student who violates the rules, it will rush to find its owner so that the students who violate the school rules can be punished. Like Filch, he is hated by most of the students in this school. A man and a cat looked at each other. Students walking in school in broad daylight certainly do not violate the rules. But as long as he opens the secret passage, Mrs. Norris will definitely recruit Filch. The most important thing is that Filch should also know the existence of this secret passage, so it is no longer safe to enter and exit this secret passage. Vader prepares to leave. Hey, Vader. Fred and George popped out of nowhere. They greeted enthusiastically and took Vader away with them. Fred put his arm on Wade's shoulders and asked quietly, Are you looking for the secret passage to the castle? Vader paused. Is it obvious? Others may not be able to see it, but in our eyes, it is too obvious. Fred said with a smile. We saw you coming out of the corridor where the mirror was just now, and now you have found Paracel. Isn't Sus's portrait looking for a secret passage? But it's useless. Filch also knows the secret passage behind the portrait. He is alert. Even if he sneaks in, he will definitely be caught when he comes out. George didn't say anything. That guy has mastered the 4 castles. The secret passage. But we know better. If you really wanted to sneak out of school and do something. What we mean is, go to Honeyduke's and buy some candy or something. Then go to the middle of the corridor on the 4th floor and look for the statue of a one-eyed hunchbacked witch. The password is separate left and right. The exit is at Honeyduke's. Then, Fred winked mischievously, looking forward to a great adventure from you. Why are you telling me? Wade asked strangely. The secret Taoists didn't tell a few people, did they? Of course, even little Ronnie doesn't know that. But you have found 2 secret passages on your own. You are qualified to become a new generation of people who break the rules. Fred said solemnly, as if he was carrying out some serious inheritance. We have also received some help from our seniors. Well, very valuable help, George said vaguely, so we should also help some like-minded people. Do a good job, Wade. Fred gave a thumbs up. You are talented. Wade didn't want to know what the talent he called. He always felt that the twins had some misunderstandings about him. Separate left and right. Wade found the statue of the hunchbacked witch and chanted a spell. The hunchback of the statue immediately opened, making the space enough for him to walk in. But Wade stood at the entrance, looking at the dark passage, and finally chose to restore the statue again. Why do you have to break the rules and sneak out of school? Wade suddenly had such an idea. Gryffindor would regard this kind of thing as a great risk, but in his opinion, this kind of behavior that increases his own risk is actually undesirable. He did need to see Remus Lupin and, by the way, Marchione, but the secret passage was only a backup option. When the legitimate means failed to achieve his goal, it would not be too late for him to use the secret passage to leave the school. Several professors flashed through my mind, and finally they settled on Professor Murray's loving smile. Not only because of Professor Murray's care and appreciation for him, but also because this professor doesn't take rules and discipline very seriously. Apparently Hogwarts does not allow access to the flow network, so he connected the fireplace in his office, although Dumbledore must have known. The law does not allow the fireplace of a non-magical household to be connected to the flow network, so he secretly found someone to open it. Many people who have the same status and prestige as Professor Murray will gradually become like moral models and the embodiment of rules as they grow older, even if it is only on the surface, but Professor Murray will roll up his sleeves and talk to businessmen personally. Bot must be negotiated accordingly. Therefore, Professor Murray is the most likely person to make an exception and allow him to leave the school. Snapped. The familiar soft sound made Wade immediately turn his head. He thought it would be one of Phil and the others, but unexpectedly it was an unfamiliar house elf. Good afternoon, Mr. Wade Gray. The elf bowed deeply. Are you? Wade's fingers clasped the wand vaguely, and he glanced at the top of the elf's head. McGee. Good afternoon, McGee. The elf's eyes widened in surprise, and the eyes that were already as big as tennis balls became more prominent, and tears quickly welled up. Wade Gray actually remembered McGee's name. Even though McGee was just a house elf that was more inconspicuous than dust, Wade Gray actually remembered his name. He also said good afternoon to McGee. No wizard ever said good afternoon to McGee. No wizard ever remembered McGee's name. The elf burst into tears. Wade sighed, knelt down and said to him, I'm sorry, did I say the wrong thing? No, how could Vader Gray be wrong? He's just as Zoe says he is, a great wizard, just as Zoe says he is, Mikey cried. This is too exaggerated. I'm not great at all. Wade took out a tissue from his pocket and handed it to him, saying, if I keep crying, I'm afraid it will attract others. A house elf who is not discovered by a wizard as a good house elf, this idea is like a moral law imprinted in the elf's mind. McGee's crying immediately became lower and gradually stopped after a while. I remember Zoe said that you were researching the making of those candies. Wade asked tentatively. Did you come to me because the research has results? Yes. Vader Gray will be able to see candy on the table tonight. McGee sobbed. No, McGee didn't come for that. McGee came to warn Vader Gray. Warning. Vader was stunned. What are you warning me about? McGee was cleaning the house in Slytherin and heard several students saying that they wanted to teach Vader Gray a lesson while he was practicing potions. McGee finished speaking with great difficulty, and then froze, as if he couldn't believe what he had done. Then he shuddered and slammed into the wall beside him, shouting, "Bad McGee! Bad McGee! Wait, McGee!" Wade grabbed her and stopped her from banging against the wall. "What are you doing, McGee?" "McGee is punishing herself. McGee is so bad. She actually leaked the secret of the little wizard," McGee said with tears in her eyes. "But Wade Gray needs to know, someone has bad intentions towards him, McGee. McGee wants to tell Wade Gray who it is, but McGee can't tell their names." He was talking and wanted to bang against the wall again, but Wade quickly stopped him and said, "Wait. You are protecting me, remember? You didn't leak any secrets, but protected a student who was about to be in danger, and you don't need to be punished." "Is that so?" McGee asked confusedly. "Of course." Wade nodded affirmatively and vigorously. McGee hesitated and stopped struggling, tilting his head, as if he was in some kind of confusion. Wade whispered, "Listen to me, McGee, thank you for punishing yourself to protect me and save me from bad luck. Protecting others and sacrificing yourself is a very noble, loving and responsible behavior. It is also the meaning and value of life. There is no reason to be punished for it." McGee stared at him blankly. After a long time, he bowed deeply, and his nose touched the ground. "Please be careful about your safety, Wade Gray. McGee will never tolerate Wade Gray being hurt." After saying this, he disappeared from the spot with a dirty tissue. Pop. Vader took note of McGee's warning, but it wasn't something he needed to think about just yet. He used to practice potions in the potions classroom when he was free, and he was probably seen a few times by Slytherin students. But they didn't know that since discovering the Room of Requirement, Vader has rarely gone there. As for who those people are, Wade naturally knows it well. He decided to leave them alone for a few days, but not for too long. If it was too long, the Slytherins might choose to give up. After class on Thursday, Wade went to the astronomy tower to find Professor Murray as usual, and unexpectedly met several 7th grade students on the way. They were much taller, but each of them looked downcast, making them look a little shorter for no reason. A girl was saying to the person next to her, "I'm going to kill Jennifer. She told me before that the alchemy course was very interesting, and Professor Murray's requirements are not too demanding, isn't that high? Professor Murray used to be really easy to talk to. Remember, when we were in 6th grade. Another student sighed and said, "It's just that this year the professor accepted a new student, and suddenly he didn't like us. He used to still like me very much." The girl in front said angrily, "Teach yourself runes in the 1st grade. That's crazy. If we weren't both in school, I would have thought it was a lie." Some students lamented, "Oh, why doesn't he spend more time on Quidditch? Have any of you studied the Book of Friends?" A boy suddenly asked. "I tried. It's hard. There's no way to crack it. It's easy to use a transformation spell to generate heat or display characters, but on a fragile material like parchment, it's a bit." Halfway through the boy's eloquent words, someone suddenly poked his arm, and his voice stopped abruptly. At the corner of the corridor, several people suddenly met Wade. Both sides looked at each other. Seeing Wade Gray, who was still like a child, and thinking about what they just said, everyone felt extremely embarrassed. After a moment of silence, they nodded stiffly and passed by. After walking a long distance, the voice sounded again. "That's Vader Gray. Yes, looks quite good looking. Quote. He probably didn't hear it, right? Heard, I guess. Ah. Why did you say it? Can't you lie to me? Stop shaking. I also want to die now. I really do." "Huh." Professor Murray looked at Wade and asked doubtfully, "Are you a little different today?" Wade smiled and asked, "Professor, what do you think is different about me? It seems that there has indeed been a change." Professor Murray touched his chin and looked at Vader carefully. After a long while, he said uncertainly, "It seems that he has become more beautiful than before. But it's not a beauty potion effect." Vader smiled and took off a badge from his chest. Suddenly, the visual sense of fair and flawless skin that seemed to have a faint luster disappeared. Even though the facial features were still exquisite and the appearance was handsome, it was no longer as shining as before, making people involuntarily focus their attention on him. Oh, Professor Murray took the badge in his hand for inspection with great interest. It was the work that Vader showed to the professor. Naturally, there was no anti-detection spell on it. Glowing spell, reflection spell, and solidification. Professor Murray looked at Vader with a smile in his eyes. You used light. Yes, Wade said. As you know, I have been taking pictures a lot recently. During this process, I discovered that the core of photography lies in the use of light. Proper use of light can cover facial flaws, make you look slimmer, and highlight facial contours. The three-dimensional effect makes people look better, so we made this soft light badge, which can reflect just the right amount of light on the wearer, making it look more dazzling. In short, it's the wizard's version of beauty filters. You always have fantastic ideas that amaze me. Professor Murray praised. Many people have to drink a beautiful potion to achieve the effect that lasts for 20 minutes, but you can achieve it with a small badge. How long is the shelf life of this thing? About 10 days, Wade said. That's not bad. Professor Murray didn't take such a little thing too seriously and said casually, some young silly girls will like it. You were planning to still let Marchione's magic workshop produce and sell it? Yes. Wade took out the application to go to Hogsmeade Village from his pocket and said frankly, actually, when I came today, I wanted to ask the professor for permission to go to Hogsmeade on Saturday. About the Book of Friends, I need to meet with Mr. Marchione to discuss the modifications and the production of soft light badges. Just for this, Professor Murray was a little unconvinced. During this time, he also got to know Vader very well. With Vader's character, these problems that could be solved by exchanging letters would never come to him specifically to apply for his permission. Actually, I still want to meet someone. Vader was a little embarrassed. You know, I'm in school, so many things are inconvenient. My father is not suitable for frequently dealing with wizards. I'm worried that he will encounter someone because of this. Dangerous. So I found an agent. I plan to meet with him this Saturday. Agent. Professor Murray shook his head in disapproval. An unreliable agent is more dangerous than no agent. Who are you looking for? Did you know him before? Or is he related to your parents? I don't know him, Wade said. Honestly, I asked my father to post an advertisement in the newspaper, and he wrote a job application letter. After meeting, my father thought he was a gentle and reliable person, so he chose him as an agent. His name is Remus Lupin. Wade knew that he didn't need to explain to his parents why he trusted a stranger without any excuses. They would choose to believe him, and they have been like this since childhood. But for Professor Murray, Dumbledore, and other people in the wizarding world, he should have a suitable reason to explain this matter. So Wade slightly reversed the cause and effect. It was not that he issued a recruitment for someone, but that someone saw the advertisement and applied for a job, so he was hired. Remus Lupin. Professor Murray frowned slightly. His expression seemed a little melancholy, and with some memories. Do you know him? Wade asked curiously. Well, Professor Murray lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, he and his 3 friends were once the celebrities of Hogwarts. They made a lot of big news in school. Few people didn't know them. What a pity. What a pity. Some people died, some became traitors, that's all. There were many such things in the war years. There's nothing to say. Professor Murray changed the subject. You said you made an appointment to meet him on Saturday. Yes, I can approve it. Professor Murray crossed his fingers and said seriously, but I have to be there too. Professor. Wade was a little surprised. Some people's dangers cannot be seen on the surface. Professor Murray crossed his fingers, looked at Wade and asked, how much do you know about curses and contracts? Wade thought for a while. I have seen the Unbreakable Curse and the Fidelius Curse in the book. I have also studied the magic contract you made for me and Mr. Marchione last time, but I have not systematically studied this aspect yet. He has only been learning magic for a short time, and he has too many things to learn. Knowing that the future will be more chaotic and dangerous every year, Wade's focus has always been on improving his survival rate. He no longer pins his hopes for safety on anyone, but only hopes that he can have the ability to deal with any crisis. Professor Murray nodded, and was not disappointed. Or rather, when he found that Wade still didn't understand something, it gave him a sense of accomplishment as a professor. Professor Murray said, the Unbreakable Curse is an extremely powerful oath. Anyone who breaks the oath will die, so it is only used in extreme cases. It is like a blood oath, which is an oath that ordinary people would not make even if they are willing to keep their promises. Let's not talk about this for now. Blood oath. Wade's heart moved slightly. The Fidelius charm is extremely complex and powerful. It is a magical spell used to keep secrets, but choosing the secret keeper is the key. If the secret keeper betrays, the spell is useless. If the secret keeper dies, all those who know the secret will become the new secret keeper. Therefore, this spell is to place all hopes on one person. Professor Murray paused and said, Harry Potter's parents died because of the wrong secret keeper. Wade knew about this, but he still asked, that person is Sirius Black. Professor Murray slowly read out the name in a disgusted tone, and then said, he and James Potter, Remus Lupin and Peter Pettigrew were once best friends, but he betrayed them, causing the death of the other two, and he himself was imprisoned in Azkaban. The only one still active outside is Remus Lupin, but I haven't heard of him for many years. Wade nodded slowly. Are you worried that he is a hidden dark wizard and will be harmful to me? Not only that, he is also werewolf. Professor Murray hesitated for a moment and swallowed the word again. It is normal for a few students to be Death Eaters. After all, almost all wizards in the UK have studied at Hogwarts, and there are all kinds of people. But if people knew that Dumbledore recruited a werewolf into the school and lived with other children for 7 years, even wizards who supported Dumbledore would probably think he was crazy. But if Wade didn't know this, he might be in danger. Professor Murray pondered for a moment, and said, he is still a person who cannot be approached on a full moon night. You are a smart child, you should understand what I mean. Ved nodded and said bluntly, in our defense against the dark arts class 2 days ago, Professor Quirrell talked about the various treatments after being bitten by a werewolf, and I have also learned some of them. Knowing this, do you still want him to be your agent? Professor Murray said, you know, this means that he is always in uncontrollable danger. If you need, I can introduce you to some reliable and safe people. Ved was really moved for a while, because he knew that since Professor Murray said so, it meant that he would use his own methods to confirm that the person introduced was reliable. But after hesitating for a moment, Wade still said, I am very grateful, Professor. But I have promised to give him this opportunity. This is already a promise to me. Unless his character is not good, I don't want to break the promise easily. Professor Murray was a little worried, but not surprised. In that case, he raised his hand and called for a few books, saying, let's stop teaching alchemy today and talk about magic contracts. This is the most common way to build trust between strangers. Time flows smoothly and silently like a trickle, and Saturday comes in a blink of an eye. This week is not a weekend in Hogsmeade, and most students sleep in the dormitory. Early in the morning, Wade got dressed, wrapped a blue scarf, and went to the first-floor auditorium. It is extremely rare that Professor Murray also appeared in the teacher's seat in the auditorium to eat breakfast, which surprised Professor McGonagall. She looked at him several times before cautiously greeting him, as if to confirm whether this Professor Murray was someone else pretending to be. Don't be so weird, Minerva. Professor Murray smiled and nodded at Wade, and said to Professor McGonagall, occasionally, I also want to feel the lively atmosphere brought by children. Wade bowed to Professor Murray and sat at the long table. Then he saw that the plate in front of him was replaced with his favorite food, and there were a few familiar candies next to it. He picked up the candy and tasted it first. The taste was sweet and not greasy at all. It tasted exactly the same as his mother sent. It seems that the cooking research of house elves should be very successful. After breakfast, Wade came to the gate of the castle first. After waiting for a while, Professor Murray also came out and said with a smile, the dishes in the Hogwarts kitchen are getting richer and richer, and the taste is good. I haven't been here for a long time. It seems that I have missed a lot of interesting changes. Ved also smiled and said casually, there are always some house elves who are not just doing their job, but studying cooking with all their heart, right? Interesting idea. Very interesting. Professor Murray glanced at Vader and said, most people would think that a wizard gave them a better recipe, and would not think that house elves would take the initiative to study cooking. Why? Vader asked puzzledly. They are intelligent and have rich emotions. It is normal for them to have some personal hobbies and work hard for them and make breakthroughs. Professor Murray was stunned when he heard this, and then laughed. Vader. Although you know a lot, you grew up in the Muggle world after all. There are some things that are common sense to others, but you know nothing about them. This is normal, too normal. He touched Vader's head lovingly, and looked at him as if he was looking at a babbling child. House elves have no self, Vader. Professor Murray smiled and said. Or, house elves with their own self are very dangerous to wizards. You should remember this, child. The topic of house elves did not continue, because Hagel pulled the Thestral who had hitched the carriage and approached through the morning mist. Hello, Hagrid, thank you for preparing the carriage for us. Professor Murray said gently and politely. Nothing, Professor, Hagrid said cheerfully. It's a pleasure to help you. Well done, kid. He lowered his body to greet Wade. Good morning, Mr. Hagrid, Wade said, looking up. The gray eyes looked cold and peaceful, making the superficial impression in Hagrid's mind suddenly become concrete. Oh, you are. Vader from Ravenclaw, right? Harry told me that you. Hagrid looked at him curiously, and then said in confusion, you should be one grade. He looked at Vader and then at Professor Murray, obviously troubled. Although Professor Murray smiled, he said in an unmistakable tone, Vade is my student, and I want to take him to Hogsmeade to practice alchemy. Hagrid scratched his hair, although he didn't understand why he went to Hogsmeade to learn alchemy. But after all, he only went to 3rd grade in school and didn't even fully understand basic magic. Who knew what conditions were needed to learn alchemy? So Hagrid hesitated for a while and didn't question it again. He patted the Thestral's neck soothingly, seemed to whisper something to it, and then said, Professor Murray, Vader, you can get in the car. This kid will take you to Hogsmeade. Wait until it's over. It will bring you back later. Okay, thank you, Hagrid. Professor Murray said politely. He got on the carriage first, and then said, Come up, Wade. After both of them were seated, Yechi stepped on the thin mist in the morning light, and the carriage creaked out of the school. Behind them, Hagrid pushed hard on the huge oak door, closing it. Thestrals stretched their black wings from time to time, as if they wanted to fly, but in the end they still walked quietly on the road. Can you see the Thestrals? Professor Murray asked suddenly when he saw where Wade's eyes were. Who did you see die? Professor Murray asked, and then immediately added, Oh, if you don't want to say it, you don't have to answer. Quote. It's a Muggle friend. After a long time, Wade said, many years ago, he fell ill and passed away. I watched that scene happen, and saw his parents in pain and despair, but there was nothing I could do. Quote. His eyes were dark and somewhat hollow, as if he was still immersed in the grief at that time. Professor Murray patted his back comfortingly and said softly, I understand, when a friend passes away, it's like losing a part of yourself, but time will slowly heal everything. Maybe your friend's parents have also moved on, overcome the haze and even had a new child. Well, maybe that's the case. Vader was a little distracted and said softly, I hope that's the case. The carriage moved forward in silence, and Hogsmeade gradually emerged from the mist. Because it was not a Hogsmeade weekend, this small village seemed very quiet, with only 2 or 3 people wearing wizard robes walking on the streets. Far away, they saw the Three Broomsticks pub. The orange light shines through the windows of the tavern, making it look warm and bright. Through the glass, you can see the crowds inside. It seems that there are many customers early in the morning. Wade jumped off the carriage and looked back. Go in, kid, I'll be in 2 minutes. Professor Murray said as he sat in the car. If everything goes well, I don't have to show up. But if the guy is late, don't hesitate, just shoot him. Just a werewolf. I'll introduce you to a better one. The old man's protective and overbearing words made Wade couldn't help but laugh. He nodded and said, Of course, I will remember it, Professor. Pushing the door open, the wind chimes tinkled. The tavern was brightly lit in the early morning, and 2 hungover wizards were lying on the table, probably asleep. A graceful lady was standing at the bar, directing a rag to clean the table. When she heard the sound, she immediately raised a warm smile, but when she saw a student who was obviously not up to the height standard, she came over with some surprise. Child, today is not Hogsmeade weekend, right? Did you sneak out of school? She walked over and asked somewhat seriously. I made an appointment to meet here and applied with the professor. Wade said, already seeing the wizard sitting in the corner. He nodded. Excuse me, ma'am. Please give me a non-alcoholic drink. Quote. After finishing speaking, he walked towards the corner. Remus Lupin, this man was more haggard and older than he imagined, and it looked like he must have had a hard time over the years. He looked at Wade, who was approaching, his eyes gradually widened, and his originally calm face showed obvious shock. You are Vade Grey. Vader stretched out his hand and said, I think my father should have introduced you to him. Yes. Lupin shook hands with him at a loss. He said you had some business that needed help, but I thought you should be older. I can understand that many people think that first-year students should know nothing. Vader said, choosing to sit across from Lupin. The embarrassing thing is that the chair in the bar is relatively high. After he sat on it, his feet were dangling in the air. Ved propped his hands on the chair, moved back, and looked at Lupin nonchalantly. Let me introduce myself again. I am the inventor of the Book of Friends, Ved Grey, a first-year student at Hogwarts. I think you also know that this invention has brought me a lot of profits. I will have other cooperation with Aslan Magic Workshop in the future. Thank you, ma'am. Please enjoy. The tavern owner, Ms. Rosmerta, smiled, put a glass of butterbeer on Ved's table, looked at Lupin again, and then left. After Ved thanked him, he looked at the yellow color and creamy foam and suddenly fell silent. Butterbeer is actually a non-alcoholic beverage. Then what knocked him down last time? Really, 2 chocolates with alcohol? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Butterbeer must have alcohol, otherwise what is beer? Maybe the lady didn't hear his request clearly. Wade retracted his gaze, recalled, and returned to the previous topic. So I need an agent to communicate with Aslan Magic Workshop on my behalf. In addition, because my personal learning progress far exceeds the current content taught in school, I also need a magic teacher. Lupin thought about the content of the recruitment advertisement. Do you want to learn the Patronus Charm? And Animagus? More than that, Wade said. There are also Disillusionment Charm, Apparition, and Memory Spells, etc. I want to learn all the magic I don't understand. Lupin was silent for a while, but still asked, including dark magic. Wade had already thought about this question and asked flatly, do you know how to do black magic? Somewhat. Lupin hesitated, but did not hide anything. Vader nodded. I read in the book that during the Wizarding War, the Ministry of Magic approved orders to use the unforgivable curse on Death Eaters. Black magic with the purpose of harm can also be used to protect others. It can be seen that the properties of magic are secondly, it's the people who use it. The reason why black magic is evil is that it will silently corrode the user's heart. Lupin was afraid that he would mislead minors, so he hurriedly explained, and black magic is extremely dangerous. Quote. Understood. Wade said. If you accept the employment, then you will be my teacher. If you think I should not learn black magic, of course there is no need to teach me. Lupin relaxed slightly and smiled. He originally thought that someone who became famous at a young age would be very arrogant, but he didn't expect that the young man in front of him was surprisingly rational and able to accept other people's opinions. This is really a good start. At this time, Professor Murray opened the door and came in. He glanced around the bar and did not look at Vader or the two. Instead, he sat at a nearby table and ordered a glass of mead. Then if I accept this job, what do I need to do now? Lupin asked. I usually stay in school. How should our magic teaching be carried out? We'll talk about that later. Wade took out a roll of parchment from his pocket and put it on the table, and said, you take a look at this contract first. If you accept the terms above, sign your name. That's it. That's when the contract was officially concluded. Lupin looked solemn, unfolded the parchment, and read it one by one. The content of the contract is very simple. The entrustment matters are the same as those just discussed. It also stipulates that the agent, Lupin, has the obligation to safeguard the interests of the principal, Vade, keep the principal's secrets, and not cause harm to the principal. It is necessary to help the client purchase alchemical materials and magic items, and as a tutor, your responsibility is to teach knowledge, develop appropriate teaching plans, do your best to protect the safety of students during magic learning, etc. Lupin nodded secretly in his heart, this is all natural. Later, when he saw the agency fee, Lupin couldn't help but be startled, wondering if he had written it wrong. The basic salary is 30 galleons per week, he said in surprise. This is 3 times what was advertised. Yes, Vader nodded. The agent is 10 galleons per week, and the tutor is 20 galleons. This is the basic salary. In addition, you can get a certain commission after the transactions you are responsible for. Lu Ping was even more surprised when he heard this. He continued to unfold the parchment and saw that the content in this regard was stipulated in detail at the back. Of course, the end of the contract also states that if he fails to perform his duties at work and causes additional losses to the client, Wade has the right to unilaterally end the contract. Vader knew that given Lupine's situation, he would agree even if he was offered a very low salary. After all, not many people were willing to hire a dangerous werewolf. And Lupine's stronger moral standard than ordinary people does not allow him to obtain benefits by committing crimes. However, low salary, contract, and morality can only make Lupine perform his duties, but not his best efforts. The role that Vader needs Lupine to play is not a worker who is squeezed to the point of exhaustion, but a teacher who can teach everything he has, a comrade who can accompany him to face danger, and a partner who can be entrusted to the rear. And these cannot be achieved without a high sense of responsibility and identity. If Galleon could buy this kind of wizard's loyalty, Vader would empty his treasury without hesitation. But the fact is that if he offered a higher salary, Lu Ping would probably think that he was up to no good. Lu Ping looked at the contract repeatedly and couldn't help but hesitated. This is too high. He originally only wanted to find a job with a weekly salary of 10 galleons, which could barely support him, but the high salary that far exceeded his expectations made him a little panicked. I hope you will bring me corresponding rewards. Wade thought for a while and then said, if not, I will fire you next month. These words that sounded like a threat but were a little childish made Lu Ping relax his heartstrings. He smiled and said gently, it seems that I must show a 200% work attitude. Come to satisfy my little boss. Or maybe, after his werewolf identity is exposed, he will be fired immediately. Lupine thought to himself. He lowered his head and signed his name on the contract seriously. Vader also signed his name, and at this point, the contract was concluded. Wade took out the new version of the Book of Friends and the soft light badge from his bag, and said, now, let me tell you about my new work. Mr. Marchione, the owner of Aslan's Magic Workshop, will arrive in about half an hour. A broom, I think you should be ready before then. Lupine looked at those things blankly. The agent's work begins now. Of course. Wade raised his eyebrows and tapped his friend's account. I always race against time. Soon after, Marchione arrived. As soon as he opened the door, he saw Professor Murray and Wade sitting at 2 tables. He understood the current situation with just a turn of his eyes. So he pretended not to see Professor Murray and greeted Wade warmly in the corner. Afterwards, Marchione learned that Lupin was Vader's agent. He completely ignored the werewolf's shabby robes and downcast look, entered the docking state without any obstacles, and praised the soft light badge, even feeling that it was more important than the Book of Friends. You finally understand the true meaning of making money, Vader. Since Professor Murray was right behind him, Marchione blinked and said in a very low voice, and promised very eagerly, next time there is such a product, you must find me. I promise that I will give you the highest price. There is no way that anyone can be higher than me because those stupid guys can't understand the greatness of this work at all. The brown-haired wizard came and went in a hurry, and in a blink of an eye he was blown away like a gust of wind, and he didn't even touch the butter beer he ordered. So, is this the end? Lupin's face was still a little confused. Well, you have to get used to it. I told you, Vader said in a good mood, we race against time. Lupin was stunned for a moment and asked, what should we do now? There is no rush. Vade gave Lupin a friend's book for contact and handed him a bag of galleons. This is the first week's salary. I think you can. Take care of yourself first. Professor Murray drank the mead slowly, squinting at his students. The young man smiled and talked to the wizard opposite. It was rare for him to show such high spirits, confident, firm, calm, and as dazzling as the rising sun. So outstanding. Time took away some people, changed some people. Decades and hundreds of years passed, but in the end it was found that nothing seemed to have changed. On the weekend, the entire Hogwarts seemed to be empty. Almost all the students were on the Quidditch pitch, this time for the Ravenclaw vs. Slytherin match. As a Ravenclaw, Vader naturally came to the audience with his classmates. In fact, Vader has never been interested in the sport of Quidditch at all. Flying freely in the sky on a broomstick certainly feels good, but risking a broken neck and playing 50 feet high, this seems stupid to him. The experience as a spectator is not good either. The golden snitch is so small that you can't even see it except for the occasional flash of golden light. Most of the time the seeker seems to be flying at high altitudes with nothing to do. The speed of other people is sometimes faster than the cars on the highway. Small quaffles and bludgers are passed quickly among the players. Wade suspects that most people can't see clearly which step of the game is going on. Rely on the commentary to know when to cheer. But the students still love the sport. Of course, anyone who is locked up in a boarding school studying all day long will love any group activity that has nothing to do with studying, even if it is hoeing the lawn or picking up grass from the nearby streets. Rubbish. Vader is an exception, as the joy and sense of accomplishment he derives from learning magic transcends all forms of competition. The stands suddenly burst into cheers. Wade was stunned for a moment, and then he followed his classmates in applauding politely. Ravenclaw won the contest. The seeker was a senior boy. He raised his right hand high, and the wings of the golden snitch were flapping between his fingers. He circled the field at high speed on his broomstick, displaying the golden snitch for all to see. Countless people stretched out their hands, wanting to clap their hands with him like a big star. Ravenclaw, Ravenclaw, Ravenclaw. In the audience, even the Gryffindor students were shouting along. Seeing the Slytherins lose made them happier than anything else. The Slytherin student left sullenly. Our score is about the same as Hufflepuff, and we defeated Slytherin again. On the way back to the castle, Michael calculated the scores of the two games and said excitedly, maybe this time Ravenclaw can hold the Quidditch Cup. I haven't seen you so active in the Academy Cup. Vader complained. How can this be the same? Michael said disapprovingly. I heard that Shariah, a third-year student, said that even if she won the college cup, she would just change the decoration of the auditorium to the colors of her college during the final dinner, has no meaning. In fact, many Ravenclaws, like Michael, have a dispensable attitude towards the House Cup. High scores are fine, low scores are fine, even being at the bottom does not matter, and they will not work hard in class. Strive for more points for your own academy. There are no other rewards for the Quidditch Cup. Vader said. This is Quidditch. Michael opened his eyes wide. Winning the Quidditch Cup is the greatest honor. Suddenly there was a loud laugh from the side. Malfoy came over with two followers and said in a low voice, "You are so proud of just winning a game. Don't forget that the Academy Cup has been ours for the past 6 years. Ravenclaws." He stared darkly at Vader and spat out one word with malice, "Mudblood." Michael whipped out his wand angrily. "How dare you?" Malfoy jumped back and threatened. "The professor is right behind you, how dare you do anything?" "What dare I not do?" Michael said angrily. "Just let the professor know what you said." He was about to recite a curse, but was held down by Vader. "Malfoy," Vader said calmly, "you should really take a look in the mirror, see how ugly and despicable you look now." Malfoy didn't know how to reply for a moment, and it took him a while to think of continuing to attack Vader's bloodline. You filthy." But Wade and Michael had already walked past, as if the people in front of them were just weeds on the roadside. Malfoy also heard him say, "Michael, when a vicious dog bites someone, just kick it away. You can't just lie down and bite it back, right?" Michael didn't know whether it was because he was laughing too hard or because he had imagined such a scene, but he was immediately amused. Even some students passing by couldn't help laughing, and looked at a few Slytherins teasingly. When Malfoy heard the laughter, he felt as if a steel knife had been scratched on his face. He was so angry that he trembled all over and almost cast a curse. But in the end, it was the professor's presence nearby that was more intimidating, allowing Malfoy to suppress his temper. He walked quickly towards the castle with his head sullen, gritting his teeth with hatred as he thought about the humiliation that Wade had given him twice. Crabbe and Goyle hurriedly followed, with silly expressions on their faces, as if they didn't understand anything. When Malfoy heard the voices of the people around him, he felt like they were laughing at him. Suddenly, he really heard his name. Malfoy and Vader had another conflict. He must hate Vader now, right? The girl's voice seemed worried. Malfoy recognized the voice as Padma from Ravenclaw, who seemed to have a good relationship with Vader. He subconsciously hid behind a pillar to eavesdrop, and signaled Crabbe and Goyle to hide quickly. The two fat boys looked at each other and hid themselves behind Malfoy, looking like they were skewering a bunch of candied haws. Another similar voice, Parvati said, "Of course, after all, he is a pure-blood Malfoy." "You say, Malfoy is not still using the friend book invented by Vader?" Padma said. "Huh." Parvati was stunned for a moment, and said vaguely, "This should be." "I don't think so either," Padma said with a smile. "Otherwise, he would be very ridiculous while scolding Vader and using something invented by Vader, right?" Right. Parvati stuttered. She didn't understand. Who would give up such a useful thing for a quarrel? And the friend book is not cheap. But seeing Padma's determined look, and thinking about her unfinished potion homework, Parvati rationally closed her mouth. Padma turned her eyes and saw a group of figures behind the pillar, and a sly smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. The girls left hand in hand. Malfoy came out from behind the pillar, and his pale face turned red. He took out the friend book, tore it into pieces without hesitation, and threw it on the ground. "Go and keep an eye on Weed Grey," Malfoy said viciously. "See when he goes to the potion classroom. I will never let that guy go." In his mind, the most powerful and vicious spells he knew were running. Killing Curse, Cruciatus Curse, Gut-Pulling Curse. No, I can't do any of these. Teeth as Big Bludgeon, Leg Locking Curse, Blazing Fire. Boom, the light of the spell exploded, and Harry flew backwards and hit the soft cushion beside the wall, letting out a low groan. When he looked up again, he held his nose and bright red blood dripped down. "Oh, Harry," Hermione called, and hurriedly stepped forward to ask, "How are you?" "It hit my nose," Harry replied in a muffled voice. He took some white essence from the shelf on the wall and applied it to his nose skillfully, then wiped the blood on his face with a tissue. Neville helped him pick up the wand, and Harry said, "Thanks, Neville." The wound healed after a while. Harry raised his head and asked, "I think the iron armor curse I just cast has some effect, right?" "Indeed, my spell was a little off." Vader nodded in confirmation, and then asked, "But it was too weak and did not have the desired effect." "Pay attention. Protego, iron armor protection. You be more decisive when saying it. There is not much skill in this mantra, it just requires repeated practice." "I understand." Harry took a deep breath, moved his wrist, and tightened his grip on the wand. "Continue." "Certainly," Harry said decisively, stood firm, and waved his wand vigorously. "Iron armor. Expelliarmus." The light of the spell collided again, and Harry's wand was released again. "Has Harry been working too hard these past 2 days?" Michael asked Neville, who had just walked back. "I see that he has been injured several times today." "Well, a little bit," Neville said vaguely. "Shall we continue practicing the disarming spell?" "Listen to me, Neville, you can't finish learning spells. Only by learning to rest can you learn better." Michael sat on the ground and didn't want to move, and said lazily, "You are not being chased by a mysterious man. Kill, why are you working so hard?" Among everyone in the SSC, except for Vader, Harry has made the most progress. He has learned the disarming curse and the iron armor curse, but the invisible armor that protects him is still at the stage where it can be broken at a touch, and the one who has made the slowest progress is Neville, who has not yet successfully cast the disarming curse. But Michael knew that Neville actually worked harder than anyone else. Seeing him fail again and again and get up from the ground again and again, Michael felt hurt for him. Neville didn't speak, just stood silently in the sparring position, and then looked at Michael silently. Michael, he suppressed the discomfort that felt like being stung by ants all over his body and stayed on the ground for another 2 minutes. Finally, he could not resist the condemnation of his conscience and got up from the ground. "Why should I study hard here with you and practice 5th and 6th grade stuff?" Michael muttered. "I will definitely not come tomorrow night. I need a party, I need to play games, even if it's just sitting in front of the fireplace, do nothing." Neville was just laughing. At first, he would still believe it, worried that Michael would no longer want to be trained by him and would never come to the Umbrella House again, so he would train for a while and rest for a while. But later, Neville discovered that Michael had always just talked and would still show up on time the next day. "If he doesn't come, you won't have a partner. Or we can rotate exercises, but one person will always be left alone." At the end of the training, Hermione pointedly pointed out the reason why Michael did this: he just wants to be lazy. But I don't want this to hold back those who are willing to work hard. Neville was startled, and suddenly felt apologetic, but I have never mastered the disarming spell. I'm really sorry for his efforts. Yeah, it's really strange. Hermione frowned, confused. They've taught you in detail. He said that your movements and spells are fine, so why can't you succeed? Hermione, Harry interrupted hastily. When a top student asks a bad student, why can't you learn something so simple, isn't it the same as saying, you are incredibly stupid? Neville was not that sensitive. He looked down at his wand, lost in thought. In the evening, after Wade finished washing and wiping his wet hair, he came out of the bathroom and saw a familiar house elf standing in the room. McGee, sit down. Wade put down the wet towel, poured a glass of water for McGee and pushed it over. He also poured a glass for himself and drank it all in one gulp. Mikey did not sit down. He leaned on the edge of the chair, holding the hot water he had brought. His big eyes were wet, and he said in a thin voice, Wade Gray shouldn't go to the potions classroom tomorrow afternoon. Classroom. There are other students using it. Wade stopped and thought for a moment before putting the water glass back to its place. During lunch today, he sat near Pruitt and pretended to talk casually, telling Padma that he was going to potions class tomorrow to practice the shrinking potion. Originally, Vader was still thinking about whether he should pretend to be casual and mention it around the Slytherin students. Now it seems that there is no need for it. On the other hand, McGee, he seems to have learned some bug-fixing skills since the last time we talked. At this time, he shook his body slightly and drank the water with great care. He seemed very happy and had no intention of punishing himself for this. Wade smiled and asked, are there any senior students? No, McGee said. It's the same as Vader Gray. How many students are going to use the potions classroom? The house elf hesitated. 6, 7, 6. 6 or 7 people. One of them may not go. Wade asked. McGee shook his head. They thought she was in the same group, but she's not. I understand. Wade took out a small friend's book and handed it to McGee, and said, I think you know how to use this. If you can't go to the potions classroom tomorrow, please let me know. Okay. Okay, McGee will do it. McGee is very willing to help Wade Gray. McGee bowed happily and disappeared with a snap of his friend account. Vade, have you noticed, in the history of magic class, Michael looked around and lowered his voice and said, Slytherin is a little weird today. What do you say? Wade asked. Just now at the door, Zabini actually smiled at me, which was really scary. Michael rubbed his arms. Are these guys planning some bad ideas? Slytherin's student reputation has never been very good, but they themselves are very united. Since the last conflict between Vader, Malfoy and others in the corridor, other Slytherin students no longer greeted them. Even in the classroom, the two sides are clearly distinct and will not mix together. However, the conflict between the two sides did not escalate to the level of two colleges. Not like Gryffindor and Slytherin, who constantly make trouble for each other. Remove the should. Vader lowered his voice and said, they are preparing to ambush me. Ambush you, in the potions classroom. Michael suddenly said, no wonder you suddenly brought up the topic of potions yesterday. Do you plan to wait until they are ready before going to the professor to report? Or, he rolled his eyes and said excitedly in a lower voice, Lou Professor Snape over. Wade glanced at him and shook his head. Michael was stunned. That's not your idea. Then you are planning to. I'll go by myself, Wade said. Got it. Michael nodded. I will call everyone. No, Michael, I mean, I'll go by myself. Vader emphasized again. Michael's eyes widened instantly, with shock written on his face. After a while, he frowned and said, who are you? You are not my friend Vader, you are some fake Gryffindor, right? Vader was speechless. I'm not kidding. Are you crazy? Michael was serious and anxious, almost yelling. They are a group of people, and you are just one. Okay, I know. Wade patted his arm to calm him down. Michael's reaction was so great that even Professor Binns, who was teaching slowly, looked over. Michael quickly lowered his head, held up a copy of History of Magic, to block the professor's gaze, turned around and glared at Wade fiercely, gritted his teeth and said, normal students know that when a group of people want to bully you, correct, the best thing to do is to report it to the professor. Yes, you are right. Vader also whispered. But then, the Slytherins will think that we are cowards and nerds who can only complain to the professor. If they fail this time, there will definitely be something brewing. Conspiracy next time. Then give them an unforgettable lesson. Michael's eyes looked particularly deep. Listen, I have an idea. Professor Snape has a potions class in the 4th grade in the afternoon. After class, you go ask questions and take the opportunity to delay Professor Snape. Then I will find someone to pass the news to Slytherin, so that they will think you are there alone. You can throw a few dung bombs to say hello. And then Snape, who was submerged in the dung bomb, ate them alive. Vader asked. How about it? Isn't it great? Michael asked eagerly. Wade nodded. Great. Then I still decided to go by myself. Wade still said stubbornly. Michael was silent for a moment and said quietly, don't tell me, you were touched by seeing Harry and Neville's efforts and decided to move closer to Gryffindor. How is that possible? Vader laughed dumbly. Well, I can ensure that I will not suffer a disadvantage, and I don't want to take advantage of Professor Snape's kindness and sense of responsibility. Michael was silent. He lay on the table as if he was exhausted, and sighed helplessly. Vade, a person who is too moral will definitely suffer a loss. Vader couldn't help but laugh. At least not this time, he said. Vader was very grateful that Michael had always considered himself, even at the cost of offending Slytherin and trying to take advantage of Professor Snape, but there were some things he couldn't say to Michael. For example, Voldemort or Death Eaters will visit the school every year in the future. The situation they will face in the future will be much crueler than now. Many people will die, including Dumbledore, who seems to be omnipotent in the eyes of the students. For example, when Slytherin confronts him, there will be several house elves in the school keeping an eye on the situation, but he is actually not in danger at all. And Michael's guess was correct, he was indeed touched by Harry and Neville. Watching them get injured again and again in the umbrella house filled with cushions and pillows, and when they get up to train again and again, Vader will think of the guy in the plot who didn't even master Expelliarmus but went to face it alone. Little savior to Quirrell and Voldemort. Of course, Vader still feels that he was too reckless. But think about it from another perspective, is he too cautious and lacks courage? If in an environment where the safety factor reaches more than 90%, and even if an accident occurs, it can be solved in time, he cannot directly face the threats of several children, but must use conspiracy and trickery to deceive the power of others. Solution. Then after Voldemort is resurrected in the future, will he just escape from Britain with his tail between his legs? Even if one day he has to leave this land, he should do it in an upright and fair manner, rather than abandoning his friends and teachers, dreams and future, and fleeing with his parents like a bereaved dog. What's more, during this period of battle training, it was not just Harry and the others, Vader was also observing, learning, and growing during the battle. He found that even the best ones, Harry and Hermione, were actually stationary in their output. They didn't know how to be flexible, they didn't know many spells, and the power of the spells was also very limited. When the opponent's spell comes over, they don't want to move to dodge. But as soon as they move around, their magic gestures will also change, and their spells will easily fail or miss. This is the case for both of them, and Slytherin students cannot be any stronger. This is normal for a first grader. So even if he faced twice as many people, Vader couldn't think of a reason why he would lose. Coincidentally, the afternoon herbology class was still held by Ravenclaw and Slytherin. Although the two sides kept a distance, some Slytherin's malice almost turned into reality. They are not acting masters, and their ability to hold back secrets for a whole day is already their limit, but the way they communicate with each other, as well as the proud and gloating eyes they occasionally look at Vader, completely convey what they want to say. Speaking out, students who had nothing to do with this matter were aware of it. Ved, Slytherin seems to be up to something bad. During the practical operation, Anthony Goldstein ran over and said to Ved, "Let's all go together after class to avoid them causing trouble for you." Ved looked at him, then looked over his shoulder at the students behind him, shook his head in their worried eyes, and said with a smile, "Thank you, but no need. I know what I'm doing." Goldstein turned to Michael and said, "Michael, don't persuade him." Michael shrugged. "This guy is stubborn, no one can persuade him." When the get out of class was over, several Slytherin students lingered outside the greenhouse, and the Ravenclaws followed Goldstein and left at Ved's signal. Mr. Gray, Professor Sprout suddenly said, "These sap grasses need to be moved to another greenhouse, can you help me get them?" Ved, who was about to leave, was stunned for a moment, and then said, "Of course, Professor." He picked up a pot of sap grass, and Professor Sprout also held a pot himself. When leaving greenhouse number 1, the head of Hufflepuff looked at the Slytherins who were lingering around the greenhouse, his face darkened, and he asked in a cold voice, "What else do you want?" Although Professor Sprout is usually cheerful and easy to talk to, her stern face is like a volcano about to erupt, which is very scary. Malfoy and others hurriedly said, "No, no." Then they ran away in a hurry. Wade almost laughed out loud. Professor Sprout turned his eyes to him, and his smile suddenly became friendly. "Mr. Gray, I think you need some help." Wade smiled and shook his head. His eyes were clear and his smile was gentle. He said, "Thank you, Professor. It's just a few misunderstandings. I can handle it myself." Malfoy and his friends ran away in panic, and when they returned to the empty potions classroom, several of them were a little depressed. "Draco, we have all the mechanisms ready, what's going on?" The two girls carefully walked in from the door holding a few glass bottles. They were a little strange when they saw everyone's appearance. "Let's break up." Pansy Not frowned, slumped his shoulders, and said weakly, "Gray will definitely not come. Professor Sprout has noticed it, she left Wade Gray behind. Quote, "You guys are too impatient. Now, everything is screwed up." Malfoy kicked a stool over angrily and sat down at the table angrily. Crabbe and Goyle stared at the others with bulging eyes, as if it was everyone else's fault. "Let's wait until next time." Zabini shook his head, sat down, and sighed, "As long as you want it, you will always get in his way." Although he said this, the morale of the Slytherins became low except for Malfoy. The blonde girl who followed Pansy in said hesitantly, "What should I do with these potions?" "Throw them away." The bottle contained a failed scabies potion. Malfoy's potion skills are very good, but in the first potions class, Neville's failed potion caused quite a mess, which left a deep impression on Malfoy. In his opinion, that potion is much more useful than any scabies treatment. This time, in order to deal with Wade Gray, Malfoy secretly brewed a pot of scabies potion, and deliberately added porcupine quills before the pot was taken off the fire, and successfully obtained a large bottle of potion that could incinerate the crucible. Green poison. Unfortunately, this medicine evaporates all the time, and soon it will change from a highly corrosive acidic solution to an ordinary liquid that will not cause any harm to people except for an unpleasant smell. Malfoy waved his hand and said, "Throw it away. Wait, give it to me, Daphne." He suddenly thought of a bad idea, took the glass bottles from Daphne, and carefully stuffed them one by one into the desk cabinet in the corner Malfoy had inquired, and Vader often sat in that position. "I still have it here, Draco." Pansy pushed Daphne aside and enthusiastically handed over the potion in her hand. Daphne hesitated. "What if I hurt someone else?" "Whatever," Malfoy said nonchalantly. "It's bad luck for them. Maybe the professor will give Gray a solitary confinement." "Wade Gray, why do you put such dangerous things in the desk cabinet?" 50 points from Ravenclaw for intentionally hurting a classmate. Malfoy imitated Professor Snape's scolding of Harry Potter, which immediately made everyone laugh. Nott also made a strange expression, and said in a high-pitched voice, Professor, I don't know what's going on." "Ha ha ha." The others smashed the table with laughter and could hardly breathe. He's coming. He's coming." A boy ran in quickly and shouted excitedly, "Draco, he's coming this way." "Who?" Malfoy didn't react for a moment. "Who else can it be?" The boy named Millicent jumped to his feet anxiously and shouted, "Wade Gray." "How could?" Zabini said doubtfully. "He must have thought that because of the professor's warning, we didn't dare to take action." Malfoy jumped off the chair, took out another potion bottle from the desk cabinet and gave it to several people, urging, "Quick, quick, as promised before, come." Everyone moved, and the two girls moved away, but Pansy couldn't help but get closer to Malfoy again, as if she was fighting alongside him. Several boys took out their wands and locked the windows of the classroom, then prepared to cast spells. Crabbe and Goyle were ready to throw out the scabies potion as if they were holding grenades. Nott also took out 2 hidden potions from under the medicine cabinet. Bomb. Daphne lay next to the window and watched. In order to avoid being discovered, she hid in the corner and watched carefully. It is indeed Wade Gray. The blonde girl said softly. He came alone. Without anyone else? Zabini asked with a frown. No. Strange. Zabini couldn't understand. Was he really not wary at all? Humph, he is indeed a Ravenclaw nerd. Malfoy said contemptuously, and gave the final instruction. Remember what we agreed on before. First throw the dung bombs, and then the scabies potion, and I took the opportunity to use the leg-locking curse crab. Goyle, you two go catch him, and Nott remembers to grab the wand. Crabbe and Goyle responded. Nott looked at the dung bomb in his hand, and his face suddenly turned a little green. When he grabbed the wand, he wouldn't have gotten this thing on him, right? Looking at the small space at the door, Nott was a little unsure. He began to think about putting the dung bomb back, or exchanging it with Goyle. His body, which is twice the size of others, can definitely block most. Just when Nott was hesitating, he suddenly heard someone whisper, "Expulso." What? An invisible wind suddenly whirled sand and rocks around the classroom. Just as Nott was about to speak, he took a mouthful of sand. Everyone screamed in unison, and then started rubbing their eyes. He's at the door. Malfoy covered his mouth with his sleeve and shouted loudly, "Throw the dung bomb. Throw the dung bomb quickly." There was a sound at the door. Nott had no time to distinguish it and threw the dung bomb out with force. Bang! The dung bomb hit an ugly head and exploded, and the foul-smelling substance immediately sprayed all over the classroom. A huge cockroach crawled in from the door. Facing the face that made people lose all reason, Nott remembered belatedly that the voice he heard just now seemed to say, and Gorgio enlarged quickly. The boy who was frightened and his brain was blank was pressed down by the huge cockroach without any resistance. Immediately afterwards, 1, 2, 3, a total of 5 or 6 spiders that were also enlarged to the size of hounds came in from behind the cockroach. Ah! Everyone in the potions classroom screamed wildly and began to flee in panic. Malfoy quickly jumped onto the table to pull the window, but found that the window was locked by a spell. They did it themselves. Alaham, he hadn't finished the unlocking spell when a claw hooked his clothes from behind and dragged him backwards. No, let me go. Mom, help. The classroom was filled with students' cries of fear. The insects cast with the confusion spell didn't do anything to them, but just the close contact had scared them to the point of peeing their pants. Petrificus totalis, petrified totally. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.